Good evening. Today is October 24th, 2024. This is the Education Committee meeting. I am Nicole Khan, the chair and facilitator for this evening's meeting. I'd like to start with roll call. Please state your name and position. I'll start to my right.
Bob Hickey, School Board.
Matthew McCarthy, Tech Integration.
Jutta Pari, School Board.
Linda Stone, School Board.
Ed Tate, School Board.
Ann Horner, School Board. Casey Black, Council Rock.
Good evening, Al Funk, Director of Secondary Education.
Good evening, Nicole Crawford, Director of Elementary Education.
Andy Sanko, Superintendent.
Michael Roosevelt, School Board.
Tracy Osecki, School Board.
Oh, sorry, Henry Mandel, Director of District Communications.
I'm Tom Barnes, data analyst for the student achievement.
Tammy Gary, the Supervisor of Curriculum Instruction.
Thank you. And I believe, do we have Mr. Hidalgo on the phone?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. Again, I just want a reminder we always want to have a respectful and effective meeting. We do have a very full agenda, so I ask for the board colleagues, please wait to be recognized for your question or comment. Thank you for that. And now I will turn it over to Mrs. Crawford and Mr. Funk.
Thank you, Ms. Khan.
Thank you.
I'll just preface by saying, this is a reminder that for reliable, accurate, and up-to-date information about our district, please refer to resources, websites, and social media platforms managed by the Council Rock School District. We advise our community to be cautious about relying on the accuracy of social media posts as they frequently contain inaccurate and misleading information regarding Council Rock. If you question what you are seeing, need additional details, or a reliable fact check, please contact the district directly. Our contact information is readily available on our website at www.crsd.org. So as Ms. Khan mentioned, we do have a rather robust agenda. Our theme tonight is probably going to be data. We're going to start off with the Student Wellness Survey, which we're about to put out to all district stakeholders. Then we're going to proceed to a data review, and that's going to really encompass the PSSAs, the Keystone results, PAYS data results, advanced placement score results. Then we're going to have special education. Special education is now incorporated in all of our education committee meetings. Then Ms. Gary will give us a curriculum update and also update on the district assessment plan. And finally, we will wrap it up and put a bow on it with an update on our Heart Safe Schools. So without further ado, we'll kick things off with Dr. Casey Black, Supervisor of Student Services.
So I'm just going to give you a brief update on where we are with the Student Wellness Survey. We've changed the format of the survey, but not the content, with the exception of some clarifying information as requested by the board at our last meeting. The format is now streamlined and allows for more accessibility by the public, so we really like the way it looks. I hope you do too. Our plan is to send it out tomorrow to staff and families, and it will be open for 3 full weekends. And then at our next meeting on December 2nd, I will plan on reviewing the results with you. So as part of MTSS, this is jumping into the data review. As part of MTSS, one piece of information that we look at is our behavior, social, and emotional data screeners, which are administered 3 times per year for all students in K-6. The screeners categorize student behavior as either internalizing or externalizing, and there are examples here listed of both types of behaviors. So for example, internalizing behaviors could be withdrawn, looking sad, feeling anxious, seeming lonely. Externalizing behaviors could be lying, cheating, stealing, or other discipline issues that are seen in the school. And we look at all of this data together to determine an appropriate level of intervention at the school level, at the grade level, and with each student. I'm going to give you some visuals to let you know what it looks like. Thank you. So this is the data from the end of the year last year. EOY stands for end of year. So this is on internalizing across the district. Each of the different colors represents a different school. And then the grade levels you see there below. Just like all MTSS data, when you're looking at it initially, you want everybody to be at a minimum of 80%. So at 80%, then you're in a good place to move on with tier 2 and tier 3 levels of support. At the end of the year for internalizing, you can see a lot of our kids were approaching, a lot of our classrooms or grade levels were approaching 80%. But there are a few there that you see that were far below that. And that's where we know we really need to target additional instruction for those internalizing behaviors that we see. So we would do that at the grade level. And then when you see the lines that exceed 80%, that's when we start to look at any kids that are not meeting at 100%, then those kids we look at more at the classroom level or at the student level if they need intervention. And then I'll flip to the next graph, which is the same thing but for externalizing at the end of last year. And you see, again, you see a lot of the grade levels in each school were at the 80% mark or better by the end of the year. But there were still several that were falling below that mark that needed additional intervention. Some trends you see with kindergarten, we do by the end of the year, we do tend to reach 100% or close to it, which we're very happy about, our little guys. And then as kids get older, it becomes a little bit harder for some of those behaviors to stay at that level. So then we know that as a district and decide to target intervention in those grade levels at those specific schools.
Following with that, MTSS is a system that looks at the whole child. So RTI, Response to Intervention, or RTII, was just looking at academic. The system of MTSS, the multi-tiered system of support, looks at the whole child to see where a student might have different barriers to their success. So Casey talked about the one side, I'm more of the academic side. So with academics, it gets a little bit more specific in regards to the structure of what takes place within the system, within the process. So looking at it kind of as the whole from the 3,000-foot level, you have instructional level, which is the courses that we teach, and they're based on the standards. So MTSS looks at the students who are struggling to meet the instructional level. So the questions we look at and ask are these 4 basic questions. And I've been meeting with all the teachers in the district in small group to go over the process and to develop the same definition, the same language, and make sure everybody understands the process. So the 4 big questions are, how do we identify students who need support, who are falling below that instructional level? How do we identify the skills where they're deficient? What do we instruct and how do we instruct? And then how do we know students have learned? So the words you'll hear again and again in regards to the system, to answer the first question, those are universal screeners. Universal screeners are like a temperature. They're quick 1-minute to 2-minute tests and many different subtests to take that temperature of how the students are. So universal screeners, just like when you go to the doctor and have your blood pressure taken or your weight, that's just to see who might be at risk. So the second part of that, how do we identify the skills that the students are deficient? We give another type of assessment called a diagnostic. So the diagnostic, following our kind of analogy with medicine, that's when you're at the doctor's and they say, seem a bit overweight, your blood pressure's high, I want to do a few more tests. Let's get a blood test done. We want to check your HDL and your LDL. That's what a diagnostic is. We need more information to see specifically where you need help. That's going to be the basis of the intervention that the student receives. It's all individual, so it's all based on the student needs. And then how do we know that they're learned? It's the term progress monitoring. So we set from the diagnostic like a benchmark, a baseline test, when we draw the diagonal line to say what the goal is, and then progress monitoring is as we're instructing with an intervention, it's every week or every 2 weeks we're doing short probes to make sure that they're learning. So if they're on the line to show growth or they go higher, That's showing that they're adequate and they could move on to either the next skill or back into just receiving regular classroom instruction. If they are flatlining, it's showing that they need more intensive support. So that's the major system of what MTSS is. So, is it the next slide? The next slide looks at the process. So the words you hear are Tier 1. Tier 1 is the core instruction, what's taking place in the classroom. This is the essential element, and if you think about it, where all the magic happens. So this is what the teacher is providing, instruction in small groups. It's all the best practices put together. So the stronger we can make our Tier 1, the more students that are hitting, as Casey said, that 80% mark, the fewer kids you'll have in intervention. The next one is the universal screeners. Again, knowing the terms, the data we're going to be talking about next are the universal screeners. They're given 3 times a year, beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of year. So you'll see those acronyms. And each of those are against a benchmark to see how our kids are moving. How are they doing as a whole? So Tier 1 data looks at a whole grade level. It takes a look at all the classrooms, and the teachers then analyze with the specialists and with their building principals to say, how are we doing? So if we see that there might be struggling in a percentage, we dig deeper to see what it is. And then within the classroom, you could be reteaching or giving a whole class intervention to make sure they're getting up to instructional level. And again, that importance of being at instructional level, as we talk more about data, is hitting the standards to make sure the kids are proficient on the PSSA or Keystone. Okay? The data meetings are when the building teams get together and they have the specialists, they have the grade level teachers, they have the principal there, and they're all looking and talking about the data and setting goals of what they want to accomplish in Tier 1 in the classrooms. As soon as we give the universal screeners and we talk about the whole group, the next conversation is about looking at individual students that are falling below the mark. With those are problem-solving meetings where we're looking at more than just the data from the universal screener. The screener was the temperature. We give the students identify of needing more supported diagnostic to see where the skill is deficient. So if you think of an adaptive test, where a student is asked a question and it'll keep going higher the more they get right to determine what their levels are. If they get it wrong, it goes down to see where their actual level is. So a diagnostic, again, looking at getting a blood test, is finding out where the issue is. In that discussion, it also is looking at, especially for the older grades, it could look at Keystone tests, at this level, PSSA scores. It could look at unit tests. It looks at behavior. It looks at attendance and figures out where the issue is and then how do we problem solve to give the student the support they need. That's where it's Tier 2 and Tier 3. So Tier 2 is targeted support once we've identified a goal and we're progress monitoring. That is done at a separate time, usually during WIN time. And during that, you're following a cycle to make sure the intervention is taking place. And again, depending on the outcome over that 6 weeks, leads to the next steps. A Tier 3 is when a student is well below benchmark or they're not showing progress in a Tier 2. So that's kind of the whole big basis for your understanding as we talk about some of the data. With this, where the district is in the process, last year was the first year that we started the official MTSS process. So following these specific pieces, the major focus was on Tier 1, especially in English language arts, because we started a new reading series, which was based on the science of reading. So that's a whole big discussion because that's now kind of state legislation is pending with Governor Shapiro. It's already gone through the House and the Senate, so it's like ready to go. And with math, we've had Bridges now for I think it's 4 years. So the concentration of the teachers was looking at Tier 1 and how the data from the classroom impacts student learning. The second part of that was last year was the first year that the screeners, so it's DIBELS for our reading and it's Acadians for math, were given to all students kindergarten through 6th grade. Kindergarten only receives ELA, not math at this time. So kind of setting up the context for you as we go in and discuss that. So the first time, it was really setting up fidelity of how we give the assessments. The DIBELS is given on a handheld device. At the younger grades, things are read to the students. The older grades, especially with math, they're doing it on their own. So the math platform is a little different because it is paper and pencil and then it's scored. DIBELS is on a computer. So moving on to it, we could start looking at the data. So the first one is with math. So we have a composite score which brings together all different components to give you an overall test score. And then in math, it's broken down into computation or concepts and application. And kindergarten doesn't have a concept and application score because they have, it's not really conceptual. It's looking at number identification, quantity, counting, and things like that. So there are scores, but it doesn't kind of fall under the concepts and applications. So when you look at the beginning of your score, because you're looking across beginning, middle, of end, beginning of year is usually the lowest. As instruction takes place, as intervention starts, the expectation is the middle, and then the end of the year would be the highest for the students. So you could see within the grade levels here, one of the things we looked at last year, because the program we use for curriculum is Bridges, it's based on concepts. So the students learn the concept first, and then the computation comes after that. When I was in school years ago, you learned the algorithms of the computation is what really led everything. Now with the change to the Common Core standards and Pennsylvania standards, and also the mathematical practices of learning, it's a switch. So people question the alignment between the two. You really want to make sure the students have the understanding so that the scores, when you look at concepts and application, that's the big, like, wow, they're doing really well with that. You might see with second grade, it's a little lower because first grade is still coming off of their foundational skills. So kind of, you'll see that between kindergarten, first and second with different grade level things. So as we look at this, last year, one of the things when we were in the fidelity checks and looking at everything, we realized the computation was an issue. So we had a lot of conversation in regards to how it fits in and at what point, and how do we look at the data to say, should we look at it beginning of year? Is it more important by the end of the year they have computation? And how in the older grades, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, it connects to the skills with the PSSA and the standards. So this is where it is right now. And we're going to English language arts, reading. Reading is different. Reading is the foundation of everything that takes place in learning. So as I mentioned, legislation that is on the desk of the governor at this point went through the House and the Senate, and very interestingly was a bipartisan vote of everybody wanting and moving forward. The main components of this is the identification and use of universal screeners, of progress monitoring, and then of looking at interventions and how students that are struggling to get to instructional level, what the practices are to get them. So when we talk about like getting to 80%, reading is a little different because you really do want to get by the end of third grade as close as you can to 100%. And it's that important with science of reading that in the state of California, what the research says that's what they base the number of jail cells that they need is on their third grade reading scores. So reading across the nation right now is at the highest point in interest level for the future of not only students, but of the country, of economics and everything. So the focus of our state on the science of reading and on ELA is very high right now. So as we look at this, again, it's the first year of giving all students the universal screeners, and they have different subtests. Important to remember with math and reading, they scaffold on each other. So the skills, if you start, it starts as the basic of being able to identify letters, the sounds that go with letters, putting them together, understanding blends, how words form. From words you go into sentences, from sentences it moves into reading text. So with these, they have kind of different names to them. You see the composite score here. Things to notice with this, as we talked about the full-day kindergarten program, we have a half-day program, so they have limited time with not able to do the whole Reading Horizons program. So you see that they have, at the beginning of the year, they need a lot more support and help to reach that because it's a time issue. We realize that, and we really look forward to the full schedule and to see how our data improves from there. That also impacts first grade because you have the students who only receive basically like half of the program. These are the beginning of year scores. So we're kind of working to get that to move ahead. And next year with full day kindergarten, we'll keep you posted on that because that'll be a great improvement. With our early reading program, based on the science of reading, that was the first year last year where we were using it. We had Reading Horizons in the younger primary grades, and then Wonders is the reading program in addition to Reading Horizons, and then in the upper grades. So we had 2 new programs, and we realized there was an implementation dip as teachers learned the program, as students became familiar, because it's a very specific program with, we say, very systemic of how they talk and how they receive and different things they do with notation. So again, that's what we're looking at, how things are moving ahead. Receiving kind of the anecdotal feedback from teachers, the kids who went through Reading Horizons are at a much different place. And we hope to continue to see that the data is going to be changing with the familiarity with teachers with the program and with the students having the experience with it. So again, as I said, the 80% target is where you want to be, but that's a normal curve. Having a discussion with teachers that our actual goal is to get as many kids to 100% as we can across all the different subtests with this. I think that's most of anything with this. The one thing I do want to bring in that we're looking at is when you look at grades 4, 5, and 6, these are the students who were in kindergarten, first, second during the pandemic, and to see how that is influencing their scores. So 4, 5, and 6 wouldn't have had science of reading in kindergarten, first, and second, and they were also in the pandemic. So we're looking through our different programming and how we can reach the kids. So we know the number there with students needing intervention is going to be higher. And then moving into 6th, 7th, and 8th, we're looking at different programs. As you remember, we're piloting the program in 6th grade this year, and then following years in 7th and 8th, because we want to make sure any students that are having deficiencies are receiving the support they need to be successful. The next slide is similar. These are the actual kind of reports for grade levels, these colorful charts. So this one is oral reading fluency. I put you could see the different percentage scores kind of right next to it. So you see the scores again in first grade will be lower beginning of the year coming out of kindergarten and then reaching up. So how we look at the data, this is the general for grade level. We look at grade level then within the building grade level, the district grade level, and in the data meetings, they're looking at their building grade level, their classroom data, and then having the discussions to see and set goals for everything. This year it's going a little slower because it's the first time of actually moving into different pieces. So just coming out of having tier 1 conversation, going into starting tier 2. For the next slide, this is also beginning of the year data. Now this is reading comprehension. The first grade you see here is grade 2 because you have to have the ability to read all of the words and passages to comprehend what's being read. So coming into that, grade 2 would be the lowest, as kids just are starting there, and then you could see as to each grade level moving. So if we're looking at that 80%, we're seeing it getting closer to it. By mid-year, the expectation is that we're hitting there. And this is the comprehension of understanding the reading, the silent reading. So yeah, it's oral reading fluency, which is out loud, looking at the correctness and how their fluidity and how fast they're going. This is now reading silently to understand what you're reading. That's it.
Good, thank you.
Back to Casey.
We're back to Casey with some more data, our PACE survey.
Yes, continuing with the data, the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, or PAYS, is an anonymous statewide survey administered across the state every other year. When we receive the results, we have a team of social workers, CARES coordinators, counselors, and the health curriculum coordinator We all meet to review the data and we look for trends together. So I listed some of the big trends here that we identified for our 8th, 10th, and 12th graders last year. And then some of the actual data points will be listed for you in the next few slides. But from this data, we saw a decreasing use of drugs overall, which we were very happy about. More students feeling safe in school. Suicide attempts decreasing, another really positive piece. Significant growth in students' understanding of risk. And while this might not seem like a big deal, this is a big piece of what we wanted to see. So I'll show you a slide about that as well. Improvement in students having a trusted adult. We're also really proud of that because we've done a lot of work with helping students understand that they need to identify a trusted adult. We try to help them. We go into all of the classrooms and help them identify a trusted adult so that they can share things, because we know that they're often on the front lines with social media and everything of hearing things, and they might be able to have information that could save a friend or help themselves. And so having a trusted adult, some person that they feel comfortable speaking with, is really important as well. It's a protective factor. Some of the negatives that we've seen, which I'll also show you a slide about, are an increase in gambling. We've seen that across the state, but also with our students. And then there was one grade level in particular that we saw an increase in homelessness and food insecurity. So that was helpful for us to know, because that's not something that we typically associate with our community. So it's helpful to have this information so that we can target our resources and support there as well. This is one of the slides of data. This has to do specifically with marijuana use, where you can see it decreasing. The numbers here represent percentages of students who are engaging in the behavior, both for their lifetime use and then 30-day use. And then it's by grade level. So you can see the previous year's information, so 2019, 2021, and then last year, as well as compared to last year at the state level. So you can see each year in the district, both for lifetime use and 30-day use, we've been decreasing steadily. So we're very happy with that. Still more work to do, of course, but very happy with the continued decrease in this area in particular. I know this looks like a lot of data, but it's important. This is the one that I said we're really excited about, because this is something where we want to provide instruction to students to help them understand what behaviors result in negative outcomes for them. So this says that the students would understand that that engaging in these behaviors could result in harming themselves or others. And so all of the different behaviors are listed across the bottom. And what you see in the colored lines, the dark blue lines, bars, are the previous last year's, the most current data. And the lighter colored blues are the previous years, 2021 and 2019. So you can see just by looking at the colors that everything is kind of increasing, and it really increased last year as far as their understanding that those behaviors result in harmful outcomes for them. And the black dots are the state average. So in many cases, we exceeded the state average in the understanding of all of those risks. Some of these here, they talk about marijuana use. And so you can see now that students understand that marijuana use is dangerous, then that hopefully results in the slide we just saw earlier in less actual engaging in that behavior. And that's our goal. So that's why these are considered protective factors. This understanding of risk is really important to us, and we're really proud that it's improving. And so the last two slides showed you some of the positive results that we've seen, whereas this one shows us an area that we need to improve upon. So here you see students engaging in gambling, and you see again 2019, 2021, 2023, steady increase in each of the grades as far as their engagement in gambling behavior, which includes things like fantasy football, online gambling. And so when we got this information, we decided to work with our health curriculum coordinator to add some units at the secondary level on gambling, so students understand what gambling is and when it becomes a dangerous behavior too. So that's kind of the way that we use this data to kind of help target our intervention as well.
All right, that was a lot, I understand. So I guess we'll start, I know Ms. Oseki had questions, and I know we might have to go back to several slides, so if, if you're able to reference that, that would be great. So we'll start with Ms. Oseki, and then.
Yeah, I think my question was kind of answered, but I had a question for Mrs. Gary. Ms. Gary, the Dibble slide and the Acadian slide, you're basically, those were where we are now, and by the middle of the year, you're hoping for 80%, and then by the end of the year, you're hoping for maybe 100 in a couple areas, but what about for everybody else?
I say for this year, that's our overall goal, but for this year, as we're just starting to, the whole process with tier 2 and tier 3, we might not hit those. So I say our overall goal in discussing with everyone is knowing the urgency to get kids to those numbers. So our hope is to be at 80% or higher. We gave cumulative district data, but we break it down by each individual school, and we break it down to the teacher level to set individual goals with everyone. So across is looking at everything together, but we set the individual goals to hit, to get that higher goal. So hopefully we said by within 2 years, our hope is to hit third grade 100%, or as close as we can get, because there's all different conditions. But again, the significance of starting with interventions and the significance of making sure our tier 1 classroom instruction is that data is really being used to drive instruction.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
So the tier 2 and tier 3 supports, that's already been happening, right? No.
They're in the district before science and reading. Students received what they could have been taking DIBELS because there was a need for it. But the actual MTSS process, when you're looking at tier 2, it's very specific to say that you're giving the screeners, you're having meetings about all the data to look at it, giving a diagnostic assessment, they're receiving an intervention, and your progress monitoring. If you're not doing all of those things, you're not fulfilling what MTSS is. So across, when people use MTSS or they use RTI, you can be in a school district that does it and does the least amount and see no change. So if you're going to do it and you follow the process step by step, and that's why this year is going to be a little slower with everything, because this is the first time teachers are learning about diagnostics. Those weren't really given before. It's the first time they're really doing an intervention where they have to follow up with progress monitoring. So the progress monitoring is very important. I think the heart of everything is to show that the students are growing, and that we don't want students kind of hanging out for multiple years in a well below benchmark. We want to really focus on improvement across for everyone. So this year, that's why I say cautiously, everyone, it's going to go a little slower because the learning curve for a lot of things is pretty steep. And that's why I've been going down the district, meeting with faculty groups, meeting with grade level groups of teachers, and having the explanation, the conversation for it, and the understanding of assessments tend to bring people down. So, oh my goodness, all they're doing is assessing. And how you look at the whole system, and I'll speak to more in a bit. Curriculum is what we want our students to learn, to know, and what they're able to do with it. But the assessment to us is a really important part to all the stakeholders to say, we're achieving this. This is the evidence that our student learns. And that's the part where if we want higher PSSA scores and we want our students to be more academically productive at the upper grades, it means that the lower grades, taking the time to see when they're not successful, how we get them successful. So there's a lot happening in the elementary schools right now.
Mr. Tate?
Yes, thank you. This is really amazing. It's very intensive. But what I'm hearing from you is that there's a lot of continual testing in little tiny chunks. It's not continually giving kids hour-long tests. It's to look at the grade level to see how the grade level is progressing, and then identifying kids. And then when you identify kids, you want to be doing progress monitoring. That all makes great sense. My question has to do with resources. When you were talking about reading and adaptive testing, that would be computer-based testing, right? But paper and pencil for the math, what do we do to help teachers with the additional workload of all this additional testing?
That's a great question. So when I get up to speak again, I'm going to be talking about curriculum and assessment, so I'll be covering very in-depth with that. What I can say is with the different programs and the technology, I meet with Nicole, Dr. Sanko, and say, like, these are the needs. We want to be efficient with what we're doing. We want to make sure that we're not overlapping assessments, and we want to make sure that we're very purposeful in what we're doing and looking at the data and the results. So on the teacher side of everything, that efficiency becomes very important. So last year we purchased what was called Linkit, and Linkit is a data warehouse. So if you think of a data warehouse as a collection of tons and tons and tons of database worksheets, and it gets all of our student data in there. So we have the data from things that we created, like midterms, finals, unit assessments. We have the state test data in there, we have our DIBELS, we have our Acadians, we have our SSIE in there also. And now the teachers have the access to get all that information so they're able to make instructional decisions. So they upgraded this year, so one thing we did at the beginning of the year is they made grade level groups of teachers, so they just have to kind of click to go in to find it, and everything's there instead of having to search and look for everything. So we're really focused on, with all the programs we do, efficiency and purpose with everything.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Stone?
Yes, I love this, and I've been trying to learn all this information as that education has never been my training. So the other question that I would have is, we're looking at the overall picture, and you will be looking at it, breaking it down by school and as well as classroom. When you see big differences in the school, is some of that attributed as well to whether the teacher is trained or needs additional support in getting the information across to the kids?
There's a lot of different pieces that go with it. So the first part of it, when we look at the data, we look at the grade level without being attached to it to see where the students are. So you could break the data down into the subtests, and you could really dig into C. And the biggest part of MTSS is the question of why. Why is this taking place, and how can we improve that? So when you look at it, last year, our biggest question was with new curriculum. Are we being efficient and effective with our curriculum? Have the teachers had enough training? Do we need instructional coaching? We are going to be doing, and this is a state level piece, training on structured literacy for all the teachers. It's a certification piece that you do, not so much professional development just based on a program. It's more through professional development for like Act 48 and Act 45, which are requirements for the state for that. That looks at all the elementary teachers, or I should say all of the teachers who have certifications in those areas, because they could have the certification in it and not be teaching. So when we look at all of the people certified in that to receive training, special education teachers, K-12, reading specialists, English language teachers as well. So as we look at all of them, they're going to be receiving, working with Dr. Sanko in the business department and Bell, what does that look like? So we had the reading specialists and some of special education already received training in letters to build their knowledge and support for everything. So we have one group that's in their second year on the second book, and a second group that just started the first book this year. So a total of about 80 people. So we're looking to systematize that. So it's the training of the teachers, it's making sure we have the right resources to make sure that everything is being done with fidelity, and then looking to see how it can improve. So it's really different for everything. When we see data that's lower for one, we really have to dig in and working with the principals to see them going into classrooms and looking at walkthroughs, and looking at the practices of teachers, looking at Rose Burkhead, who is the elementary curriculum coordinator, constantly looking at the curriculum. So we worked on scope and sequence this summer. We worked on report card and assessment issues. So it's looking at all the different dynamic pieces that come together. And I emphasize we're at the beginning, but within 2 to 3 years, everything's in order with that. So this year is still a year of learning, but all the pieces being put together. That helps, that answers that.
Yes, thank you.
And if I could add on to that, just with the level of collaboration that Ms. Gary's sharing is happening at every building, we're having that same level of collaboration when we have principals come together. She attends every meeting. MTSS has been and will continue to be a standing line item where we're talking about data, we're discussing practices happening in each of the schools, we're problem solving together. So as you shared, we're all learning and growing our own knowledge and working through various situations that come up in the building. So that collaboration, I'm really proud of the work that's been happening, and the fact that as issues maybe come up or, we talk about celebrations that are happening, we're all discussing it so that we have that consistent approach to MTSS, which is critical between the 10 elementary schools. So that's been something that I think has been a really great addition in recent years, that we are discussing it every month as a team with Tammy there. And there are times when we even invite others like Dr. Barnes to look at the data with us, and that's a focus and will continue to be.
Ms. Polly?
I'm loving the whole MTSS system, but do we have tables and cadence from last year, or we do?
Last year was the first year when they started the giving to all of the students. So the teachers were working with the specialists for training, because the goal of that is to have the teachers to get all the assessments, so that as they give them, they're receiving the information so that they're able to start with their tier 1 things. It's not to say, I want to be cautious with saying everything, that it's not pie in the sky, because there's a lot of different issues to work through. So some of the issues we're looking at is time allotment of win time, making sure there's enough time for all the interventions to be done with fidelity, looking to make sure we have enough personnel covering the different interventions, making sure our interventions and now the addition of diagnostic assessments are the best resource that are there. So we have our vision of what we want to do, we're working on all the pieces, and we're moving along on everything. But I want to be cautious to say I'm not trying to make it like pie in the sky, everything is wonderful and perfect. There's a lot of work taking place to get us to there.
Does it make sense to compare over time with the scores?
Last year, very cautious because it was the first time with everything. So making sure that everything was done with fidelity to make sure the scores were accurate, especially with math. It was a different way of grading where you get points if different things were done. They really had to take their time in doing everything. So we were very cautious with data for last year. So also recognize the difference in programming with students. So that's when I mentioned with 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, we have to look at differently, knowing they didn't have science of reading and they were during the pandemic. So I'm going to say when Mr. Barnes starts to talk about the data, we really have to be cautious with comparisons. The other big thing is that MTSS is really instructional based, first of all, for teachers to gather information to inform their instruction in Tier 1. But then also to work with individual students. So the comparison for an individual student looking at their scores, I think, is the most impactful for what you're doing. But to look at like 2 different schools and compare them, sometimes it's like apples and oranges, because you have different groups at different buildings that's not consistent all across. So the bigger expectation is digging down into instruction and comparing things with that, looking at individual students and comparing where they are to make sure that they're receiving the support to get to instructional level. So I'm just cautious with comparisons because a lot of times we're looking at different things.
But you will bring the data from as time goes on, say for this year, so we can see the improvements.
Yeah, and they do that now. So they're looking at their last year's data. They on Lincoln, as you said. So when a teacher goes into Lincoln, they go on the dashboard, they could go into their beginning of year data for this year and they can look at the student data from last year, beginning, middle, and end. So they have that capacity to look at that. So they're having the conversations. When it's stable, then we could bring and make comparisons here.
I think I'd be also interested to see the differences between schools, if there's, because this is an aggregate, all the grades, but if we can see if we, and I know at the data that Dr. Barnes presented, we have seen like schools and differences, between schools, so we should be very careful at that. And I understand that it's very important per student to see the change and the improvement, but we want at the end of the day, our students to meet the standards or exceed overall. And, I think like to be able to read well and do math well, everybody should do that, right?
The big comparison that our goal is to look at is to look at the data from MTSS and see how it correlates then to our summative assessment, which would be like the PSSAs. So if we are successful with interventions in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, and the students' foundational skills are rising with instructional level, that should impact their overall learning and meeting the standards as well. And Mr. Morris.
Thank you.
Ms. Horner?
Ms. Crawford, I think maybe if you could elaborate on the staffing of the reading specialists and the math specialists, the current reality, and as you say, is there some issues that can maybe help? If that's if something you're looking at, what is it the need there? I mean, I don't think you have the data now. I know we've talked about it a while ago.
We appreciate that question, for sure. And last year, if you remember, we asked the school board for an additional math specialist to add to our team so that we could have at least one math specialist per building taking the lead, which has been great. But if you also remember, we talked about how after collecting data this year, we may be coming before the board again and asking for some additional support if it ends up being warranted. And we certainly would provide the community and all of you with that data. And this is the type of data we're looking at. Ms. Gary and I have talked a lot, as well as principals. And it's important to note that we're talking to math specialists and literacy specialists and coordinators about the needs that we have and if staffing can impact those needs positively. But we felt that it was important. We knew that additional math specialist was critical last year, but we thought it was really important to come before you with additional data from this year, especially with MTSS, what we're collecting, to be able to say we do believe that additional staffing could be warranted, but we will be looking at that closely this year. So we appreciate that question.
Mr. Hickey?
Just a couple questions and hopefully a clarification. For the English part of that MTSS survey, does that also include the non-English, like students who English is not their primary language? Is that factored into that graph that we saw?
Yes. So with English learners, when students first come, they're given a test to see where they stand. So if they are like a 1 or 2, they're just coming in, they don't have the language skills, then obviously they wouldn't test. So it's students that have the capabilities to test. So what happens for ELA when they're taking the test, if the first 5 questions aren't able to be answered, whatever the sub-skill is, on the one you might have seen there was little slash marks for first grade, that's when they took the first things and they're not showing success in it. So it would all depend on the level of the student and their identification from needed testing in regards to how they would take. But MTSS is set up is for all students.
And then a couple questions for, I guess, probably Ms. Black. One of your graphs was showing the use, marijuana use was down. One of the things that, maybe I'm just misreading the situation, but it seems to me that vaping is up. Is that a correct assessment? And if it is, where is it where is it overall? Like, are we improving on our overall vaping and marijuana? Is it the same, or?
It breaks it down by the different things that children use in the vape. So the marijuana is the place that we usually focus our energy to look on. I don't know if it has a category for overall, but I can look into that to see if I could somehow get from it over an overall number. But the drug use is where we look at mostly, and all of those were decreasing. But are you asking about nicotine specifically, vaping of nicotine?
Both.
Okay, yeah, I can look into whether or not that's decreasing as well.
Yeah, and then my other thing is a comment. Good luck with the gambling. I'm serious. I mean, it's promoted. I mean, if you're a kid watching a game, the announcers are actually promoting it. So I don't know how, it's obvious that it's gonna go up. I don't know how you curb it. I don't know, I don't know how you train the kids to not gamble when you're seeing it on, everywhere you look, and it's promoted. But good luck if you can find anything to do. And then my final question is for Dr. Barnes. I assume at some point we're looking at the MTSS from a 3,000-foot view. Are we going to dig into the data from a 3-foot view, like we had done before, and analyze that data?
I love doing that. And part of the, I think, closing remarks that I would make at the end of my time in front of the group tonight would be, I think a marriage of the two systems requires that. Because you'll want to know what assessments we're doing for these important fundamental academic skills, and what they're going to mean for the assessments at the end of the year. As Paolo was pointing out, what's it going to mean for your PSSAs, your APs, everything else that's down the line that people are looking at. Somebody had mentioned the word efficiency before, because assessments take time. What are your high value assessments? Because if you think about it, a lot of the things that I'm talking about tonight are what happened last year. I hope in the next 2 or 3 years I'm able to sit in this October meeting and tell you what's going to happen next year. This is what we're looking at in terms of the scores that you can expect to see in May. And by doing that 3-foot look at the data, and we've talked, we've been to the elementary school, we've handed out, you're seeing for the PSSAs, for example, you're seeing those bars that represent 10 elementary schools smushed into one bar, and you get a composite average. That doesn't represent any school. That's just kind of like the 4th grade. So I break it out by school, I break it out by standard, and I go to the principal's meeting. And I say, these are the things and how these tests on the microscopic level feed into the development of those academic areas that then pay off in those skills that are reflected in the summative assessments. I think is a large portion of what I hope to do.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, one of the, when you were showing some of the math, from the high level data, and we've did this before, where you actually presented us the data from the different schools of what's going on, and it was like, hey, what's happening here at this particular school or this particular area? Hopefully we get that same data, because one of the things that I've noticed before, and I saw it again just off the top of my head, is I look at 6th grade math. And I always see the drop off. This is the second year, now this is the level up here. I want to see that level here, and what are we doing to address it? Because it was around last year, the 30,000-foot view, it appears that it's around again this year. So I want to see that raw data to see what are we doing and how can we improve, not just math scores, overall scores, but ones where there's a perceptible drop from one grade to another or from one area to another. And it's been a constant thing since I've been sitting on this board, and I don't think we've really addressed it yet, or at least not properly, in my opinion.
I totally agree about this. The school level is where it happens, right? And the board was able to see a lot of the data from the schools that gave you kind of an appreciation of of that perspective and, what the bigger bars meant and didn't mean. So cooperating at this point, no, the board hasn't seen the school level data. I'm not going to say it tonight, but the schools have. So the operational components of the test from last year, broken down into the standards categories, schools have seen, and they are starting to work on it. So as it becomes relevant to the board's interests, the state will be available.
That'd be great, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Roosevelt? Oh, okay, so Mr. Roosevelt hasn't had a chance, and then I'll circle back to, yes.
I have some macro and micro questions regarding a lot of the slides that we looked at, and it may be helpful to go to a couple for some of these. I'm interested to know how the MTSS data is collected. It sounded like some of it was paper and some of it was a tablet or something. Is this administered to all the students in the class? How long does it take to do that? Or is it, and what specifically are they being tested upon? Are they being tested upon the material that was presented last week, the day before, 2 weeks ago? Effectively, from my understanding, is it kind of like a quiz?
So for MTSS at the elementary level, it's foundational skills. So as we said, like for math, it's computation. So it could be anything from like number discrimination. So like when you're looking at first and second grade, you're looking at, can they identify 1, 2, 5, 6, counting, things like that. So the skills go up with everything, but by the time you get to 6th grade, you have like multiple digit things and you're timed with it to see. So the tests are, say, you have your curriculum looking at standards, but for MTSS, those tests are more based on the foundational skills that the kids need to be successful in order to meet the standards. So those assessments, those subtests are like 1-minute tests for the kids. So some of them are timed, some are the teacher asking for response, some are the kids writing. So like the fluency, on the tablet, the student will start to read, the teacher's taking the notation when they make an error, and then when the time ends, they make a marcation. So that's through ELA how that data is gathered. Math is different, where it's written and then things are scored. So on a math scoring in the 5th and 6th grade, if they do this, they get a point. If they didn't do this, so it's a little bit more intricate with the teacher scoring the assessments with it. So that data is gathered then in both of their systems. So for DIBELS, the system uses Amplify, and Amplify takes all that data and then creates the reports that they look at. In Acadians, it has to be inputted into the system, and then we use that data for everything. So the teachers can either draw the reports from the systems, we take that data and we put it into Linkit, our data warehouse, so then others can use, and we could use the raw data to get different information. So it's a couple different systems.
Okay.
And just to reinforce, those are screeners, so they're used, as Ms. Gary said already, to help inform our practices. So it's just something to continue to reinforce that.
And a screener isn't an individual, it's more of a system of administering the MTSS.
The screener is implying that it's like the test, like when you have your temperature taken. So it's just to see if the students are at risk for it. So it's identified as well above benchmark, benchmark, below benchmark, well below benchmark. So then, when you talk about the entire MTSS system, we're focusing on students who are not meeting the benchmark. We also have the other side of it, where we're identifying students that would be eligible for enrichment and what we do with that. But it's that quick temperature take, that's why the tests are only about like a minute, but you have to give individually to your whole class and all the subtests with it. And that's then we move on to a diagnostic screener to find out where specific deficiencies are.
Yeah, no, I understand the analogy and I understand the purpose. I'm looking more for the application in Council Rock, in physicality, between the system and the student, or between the teacher and the student, to understand because we're not sticking thermometers in their mouth or having a temporal scan their head. I want to understand it in practical standpoints. Not that I don't understand, I'm trying to understand the application. With that, do we have there are a lot of systems. Is there a cost associated with that? And is there time? If these systems are evaluating it, is that reducing the amount of time that teachers or principals or curriculum coordinators are assembling this data?
So as it is for DIBELS, when they're being administered, it's collecting the data automatically. So it's a very efficient process so that they can look at that data and they can reference it. Cadence, because it's paper-based, takes longer. The teachers do have to score it, and then they do have to put it into the system. But once it's in the system, they have access to all the reports for it.
Does elementary school in Council Rock still assign homework? And is that homework reviewed, graded with the students and handed back to them?
And that's totally separate from MTSS.
I understand.
Asking
I
that
understand.
question, I would let say it depends on the grade of the subject and the teacher in regards to that. I could certainly find out.
Generally speaking, homework is still given, but I don't think we can say that it is looking the same. It is depending on the student or the teacher or what's being assigned, what's being taught. So I don't know if you could answer that it's all the same across the 10 elementary schools.
Okay. That's interesting. The other question that I've got is the idea of MTSS or all of these systems that cooperate and talk to each other to produce these larger aggregate views and everything. Where did this come from? Was this Council Rock's idea, or is this an established idea that came from somebody or some state or some district or whatever?
So it started years and years ago as response to intervention. So it was started to look at nationwide students who needed support to be preventative so that they get what they need to do and going into special education. To really get the information as soon as you can. So 1, 2, 3, we're really effective with it. However, MTSS looks at the whole child, so it pulls in all the different areas, and it also goes all the way to high school. So most specifically to answer your question, and I kept referencing Senate Bill 801. So the state and PDE, as a reference, it's on Governor Shapiro's desk right now, and that does focus on saying the state is kind of, if you want to say, mandating through legislation the science of reading. So the way that you are instructing in elementary reading, very purposeful, say what you can do and what you want to get away from, what was kind of done in the past. With that, you must use the universal screeners. They're setting up a committee, and this is all pending the state signature. So it's setting up a reading committee made up of different stakeholders to say, this is a list of our approved universal screeners, our approved curriculum of science of reading, and our approved interventions that we want the districts to use. So they took out a lot of the language that was about reporting, that what a district would have to do. Originally, they were going to look at beginning of year information, end of year information. Now it's really focused on instruction with students. So pending what happens if Governor Shapiro signs that, then to answer your question, would be yes, it's coming from our state legislature voting on it, saying this is what has to happen. So although it's been there for many years, now it's being said that it has to be done that way.
Right, so it sounds like it might be coming from the Federal Department of Education and or the state if the governor signs this bill.
It's all state related because you can see other states that have had it for years. So it comes from the Pennsylvania legislature.
Right, and then if Senate Bill 801 is signed and becomes law, does that reduce the cost for all of these systems? Or will they be provided in some capacity?
With the legislation, how they would put things into effect, would say if they offer grant opportunities for it. The thing, when we're talking about MTSS, so as you know, the state allows local decisions and governance for it. So, example of just myself, I came from Lehigh Valley. Many schools were doing MTSS for many, many years. So there might be money put forth for it, but it would be that every school gets something because the level of application for MTSS and universal screeners varies totally across the state of ones that have been doing it for years, ones that are just starting. So unless the governor puts in, it would be the fiscal note of the legislation for their budget for the state, it all trickles down to the school districts at the local control making decisions.
And maybe this is a Tony Rapp question, but earlier indicated what's the cost of all of these different systems? Is that something that we know, or is that something that Mr. Rapp may have to answer at another meeting potentially?
That would all have to go through approval for the budget. So when we plan for the budget and we put the budget before you, all of those different systems, if it's an annual cost, would be in the budget for that. So there would be a cost associated for Dibbles and for Acadians.
Wonderful. I have other questions about pays, but I don't.
Okay, so we'll come back to you. So I want to see if Mr. Hidalgo, before I kind of do round two, I guess, is Mr. Hidalgo, are you on the still phone with us?
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Ms. Khan. Thank you, everybody, for the presentation. My apologies for not being there today. Something that Mr. Hickey said about, or his concern about the gambling kind of reminds me of an anecdotal story I just heard this weekend. Now it actually makes more sense. I listened to a couple kids speak about, oh, we're gamers, we like the games. And then one kid, no, I'm a gambler. I'm like, where the heck did that come from? So they're figuring it out online that gambling is something that the young kids up in middle school. So I find it interesting that I had no idea that kids are gambling. It's just at the middle school. So I think some more public awareness to the parents is in order for us to do. I think that would be I think you guys said you're already working on something like that. So that being said, I guess I really appreciate it. I like the idea. You guys are working hard. Everybody's getting this plan moving and figuring out how to do the different tiers of testing and intervention. My question would be, well, I've got three questions real quick. I don't know who to direct this at, but how does this whole system, the MTSS, fit in with kids who are already having IEPs? And does that skew the data, or some of this could be overlap, or do you not test them? That's my first question.
Okay, so for that, as Patent is the organization for the state that kind of oversees everything with that. MTSS is for all students, so that is one area that we're truly working on. If a student is sitting in an inclusive setting in a classroom, they are already in Tier 1. So it works with the individual and working with our special education system to see what the IEP goal is and then how we progress with them in regards to the skills that are needed. Because as you remember, I keep saying instructional level. So the goals of the IEPs, the goals of MTSS is to give our students the base to make them successful. So the short answer to that is yes, special education students are included in MTSS. The longer one is it's really based on individual needs and goals based on their IEP.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question is, so you're tracking the systems in those two. Are you tracking the information in two systems and everything gets consolidated and linked? Some students are being identified as at risk. What mechanism are you providing the parents to know that their child has been identified as at risk, either at reading or math?
Great question. So both of the systems, well, the first part of the question to answer, Acadians and Amplify have the data for the current year. So as we switch years, if somebody wants the data from last year in either of those systems, we have to go through Linkit to get it. It's not a storage type of program that we use. So that's why kind of the data moves from one to the other. The second part of that in regards to parent communication. So we talked at length with it last year, and everybody kind of wanted to be very cautious with everything until we had fidelity. So as requested, we gave parents information. This is the first year where we're sending the individual student reports, we're sharing them with the parents all 3 different times. That said, we tried to look at different ways in which is the most efficient way to do that. So I actually printed all of the reports, 10,000 reports in their color. So we said, like, is this something feasible to continue? What's the best way to do that? So as Mrs. Crawford was saying, having a discussion with the principals, the decision was made that since it's the first year, they strongly felt that having the opportunity for the teachers to discuss what those reports mean. So what a yellow means, what the red means, how MTSS works, how it all fits together. Having that initial conversation with all grades at parent-teacher conferences and then receiving a hard copy. That said, the process this year has been slower as we're getting everybody on board with the knowledge to do everything. So the one part I want to tentatively say is we're looking how to use technology so that we are able to not use all of the resources of color printers, of paper, and trying to get things home and making sure they arrive home. Our goal is to make it digital, but it's a process. I don't want to get too technical with it. It's not an easy process where you just push one button. It's all related to going into each teacher thing. So hopefully, if everything works according, fingers crossed, that we'd be able to have that digitally available and at a quicker pace. Once they have the understanding, when it comes to mid-year, that it would be able to go out a lot faster to parents.
And also just to add, although the decision was made to have teachers speak to the data during conferences, any parent that has asked for this information prior to conferences, we've sent that information home.
Okay, so I mean, I'm not saying print out the data and give it to every student that was tested, but when someone is identified at risk, are you going to wait, or are you contacting the parents that they're at risk? I'm not talking about showing them reports or anything. Say, hey, you know what? We've identified your child as at risk for reading, and these are some of the steps that we are taking to help that. And by the way, you could probably do some stuff at home on your own if you're aware that, you know, if they're aware, they could be a partnership. So I'm trying to understand a little bit better of how you're making the parents partners in this initiative, because it's a good thing. I'm glad we're doing it. But, you know, I'm going to leave that for another time, because I know other people want to speak. Unless somebody, I mean, I don't want to keep going beating the horse on this. We're going to find out how the parents can get informed. And I think the last thing that I was going to ask in this round was looking at the whole child. You guys were talking about reading and math, and those 2 things. Isn't there a whole nother part to NTSS? And I don't know if it's part of legislation or not, but is there another part that works on the psychological effects and wellness of a child that we're planning on implementing?
Yes, no, we have been. That was the SRSS that I spoke to earlier. We started doing that at the beginning of last year as well.
Okay, so we're going to apply the MTSS to social emotional learning. Okay, I think that's it for now. I just appreciate that we're working on getting these children the help they need. One other quick question. I keep people saying the word fidelity. This came up rather recently. It seems to be a buzzword. Can someone explain to me a little bit better what exactly it means that we're trying to do all of this with fidelity, and fidelity with who, and all of that, please?
To that. So fidelity means that we're following the procedures of how things are supposed to be done. So for example, when a teacher is administering a screener, there are certain steps that have to be followed. So we want to make sure that every teacher, as they're giving these assessments, are doing it the way it's supposed to be done, so it doesn't impact or not getting a false result of anything. So it's in the administration of it to make sure that it's taking place. When we say fidelity of the actual instruction with students receiving an intervention, the fidelity part goes to, there's usually explicit amount of time that it has to take place. So it'd be like if it's 2 days a week for 30 minutes, we have to make sure it's taking place 2 days a week for 30 minutes. There's fidelity and progress monitoring of saying when it should be taken, how it should be administered, how often you're giving the progress monitoring, how it's charted. So when we say it's a process, there's a lot of different steps that teachers have to know and follow to make sure that, I guess, we're having clean data to make sure that everything is done properly and we have the correct data.
Perfect. So just that fidelity means that everything is consistent across the board when administering the program. Okay. Last thing I just want to reiterate, I really think that technology is there to be able to inform the parents. As soon as you identify that child as at risk, those parents should be informed with an email. That's not difficult. If it automated, spits out a list, then I understand, then maybe someone has to go there. And we do it every day. And we don't need paper and pencil or ink printers and color printers to do this stuff. But again, I just think that keeping parents informed of what we're doing is so important. So thank you. That's it for me.
I think it was Ms. Stone and then Ms. Oseki.
In talking about fidelity, or actually you're trying to eliminate bias as well, right? Tester bias. If the parents think that the results are not representative of their child, can they be rescreened? I should say screened.
Yeah, that's the whole part of having that information with parents, really building that knowledge, because we have the two things taking place at the same time. We have the teachers learning the new systems and the teachers gaining the knowledge to be able to be accurate with everything, to have that accurate discussion with the parents about everything. So kind of putting it all together, that's why I think the principals really wanted that discussion to take place with it. So if the student is identified through the screener or not, it shouldn't just rest on universal screener data. So if you think that, oh, well, my child is showing this data, because one of the things that happens, especially for 5th and 6th grade, when you have PSSA data, and you might have in the, just say DIBELS, they might show as like a below benchmark or a well below benchmark, but on the PSSA get proficient. So it's putting all of the data together, and that's the really important part when you say it's the problem solving meaning is why are we seeing this and what does it mean? So those questions become, it's not cut and dry with anything. That's why I kind of take caution with everything, because you're really looking at individual students. And if we want to get to the place where every individual student is receiving what they need to be successful, it takes those times and conversations. So kind of reflecting back to the reports and the parents, the other thing talking with the principals was last year, there was conversation about form letters and sending form letters home. And the decision this year is instead of sending a first form letter home, we thought it was very important, and the principals really reflected this, to pick up the phone and to have a person-to-person conversation, or then to send an email to say, let's talk about this and discuss it first. Because any parent that picks up a report and sees red, automatically what's happening, and are gonna pick up the phone and say, what's taking place. So I know with a couple schools, I said I've been out to all of them talking. At first, everyone was a little scared, and I always use the analogy, I was a high school principal for 10 years. And they said, you wanna be the first one to make the phone call and have that conversation, because it's that important. You don't want someone to have to pick up the phone and say what's happening. So that's a practice started this year. Again, it's a new thing, that's our first step with it, but that communication part is very important. So again, teachers learning and making sure that things are done correctly, and then having that communication part. So if there is a question about a score, it's a lot more that we want to look at, not just a universal screener.
So in general, though, would you be looking at MTS scores against the PSSA scores to ascertain, are we measuring it properly? You know, are they in sync?
So there's a lot of different types of assessment, and we're working with this with teachers. So the formative assessments that are taking place in the core class. So if you think of quizzes, unit tests, even the exit tickets, where you're constantly taking the pulse of what's taking place in your class. The universal screener, the diagnostic assessment, the progress monitoring. Again, progress monitoring is the heart of it because it's shown students are making growth to that instructional level. That's identifying, helping the students who aren't at instructional level. Then there's benchmark testing, and we're going to be talking about this in a while, but the state has come up with the benchmark test, which it's piloting this year. That is the closest correlation that's going to be to the business. So we want to take a look at the different assessments to say, how are we getting our students who struggle to instructional level? And then within our curriculum of what we're doing, how is that instructional level translating to our summative with our PSSA scores? So we've been having a discussion about that, and what the best way to look at that is to see how our kids are getting there and being reflective of making sure that the two match. Because they keep going back to, sometimes those scores say two completely different things. So it's really getting the teacher's level of understanding to put those pieces together instructionally.
And then I have one other question regarding PACE. One of the slides you showed talked about the students having a much better, over the years, having a better understanding of the known risks. Was gambling on that?
No,
Okay.
I can read them. So smoking, cigarettes, alcoholic beverages, marijuana, different frequencies of use.
Right.
Prescription drugs, and vaping.
So gambling was not part of that?
Not.
Which, so it might behoove us to be more informing of the risks of
Exactly, that's
gambling.
exactly what we're trying to do with our health curriculum now, is letting them know what gambling is and when it becomes dangerous.
And what grade levels were they tested for that, when they were asking about gambling? It's only middle school and high school?
Last year, we administered the PACE to 8th, 10th, and 12th.
Okay.
Osaki? Okay, so just to harp on the communication one more time, I know Joe and Linda both were curious about it, but now listening to all that, I'm kind of even more confused, so please. Because at first I thought you said that the results were going to be shared in conferences in November, but then you said that the teachers are going to pick up the phone and call. So what's happening?
The actual reports will be shared at conferences, but we're starting interventions, so there's a lag between them. So if a student is starting interventions, they're calling people and they're having discussions to say, your child is benefiting this is what we'd like to do, and then that's followed up. If they started those and then you have the conference, it's together.
So have the tier 2 supports started?
Depends by building. So the next process is from there, they're doing the diagnostic assessments with it, and it's different with ELA and math. So the buildings are at different places with their data collection and moving to it. So they said this year was very slow with the setup of everything. Once the system gets started, it's very fluid and moving. So this year is kind of painfully slow with everything, but it's taking the time to make sure that everybody is understanding and the systems we set up are there. In the future, it should be a lot faster.
Is it fair to say that like in the future, next year or the year after, kids will be in support, tier 2 support by October?
How it should be. Our goal is to be, our end of year data collection should drive the students when they come back to school by the second week. You could start by using end of year data.
That's awesome.
So that as you're still testing beginning of the year, you go by an intervention cycle of about 6 weeks. So by the time you're finished your testing for ELA math, you could have an intervention cycle.
That's
so
awesome.
These are the discussions that we're having as we go through it to say like, okay, we're doing this year, but our goal is in what we're doing. So knowing the process with end of year, how we start the year, so that you're constantly in intervention cycles.
That's terrific. That's very exciting. Good. Thank you. And then my other question for Mr. Funk. Sorry, Mr. Funk.
Yeah, I'm here.
I know you're hiding over there.
I'm good.
So with the PACE data, all the things that are dropping in the data, I was curious if that's been reflected in your experience. Is drug use down?
No, I mean, I think just piggyback on like Mr. Hickey's question, like the THC vaping, I think that continues to be an issue at the high schools, and we've seen that even a little bit more at the middle schools, which is concerning. We talked about that as a board, with the board, when we were modifying policy number 227. But in general, you know, when you look at this data, and I think Dr. Barnes is going to speak to it, it's hard. Because this is a lot of information over years. The PACE data is given every other year. And obviously you have a different population of 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade student taking that. But I think you're looking at general trends. You know, it's uplifting to see that in some of those areas, you know, it looks like we're trending in the right direction. That is also going to show some areas of concern. And I think that's our job, whether it's MTSS, PSSA, Keystone. You know, we're trying to look at things holistically. Oftentimes, especially in these high stakes testing, you're talking about a snapshot. You know, and I think the message we want to reinforce is oftentimes you have to put the jigsaw pieces together and try to form the picture and ultimately have that inform what you're doing. You know, when we talk about formative instruction for teachers, it's about, well, how is this going to inform my teaching going forward so I can connect with a student and grow the student. Same thing with the PACE data. I don't think there's necessarily anything that, you know, we're seeing at the schools that's reflected in the data that's, you know, overly concerning. I mean, these are some heavy-duty topics, you know. Even, you know, when you start talking about you know, self-harm and things of that nature, these are heavy-duty topics for our kids. And we even are, you know, cognizant of how we present that and how we talk about that. That's why the health curriculum in particular, these are difficult topics to navigate. But the shorter answer to your question is we haven't necessarily seen any prevalent behaviors at the middle and high schools.
Mr. Roosevelt, I think you said you had a.
Thank you. Yes, consistent with a couple other colleagues talking about communication. If the intent is to grab parents' attention and potentially make them concerned, I think the use of red and words like at risk accomplish it. If the purpose is to have them cooperate, and that's the only way to do that, to get them to be concerned, maybe this is functioning as intended. If that's not, I think those two things might have something to do. And that dovetails into another comment before I get into PACE. There's a lot of words and language that are medical. And this is a school, not filled with doctors, but filled with teachers. So I don't know if those analogies are are best because people don't understand the concept. And so an analysis of taking a temperature and getting a blood test, that sort of a thing. Okay, the light comes on. But I don't know if that's needed. I think a lot of people understood this, and I would caution. I think that it's better to stay on education, talking about education topics. Some of the slides, the descriptions seemed a little bit more medical or psychotherapeutic, and once again, that's not what the staff of this district include. Instead, it's that of teachers. But the data seemed to be very much curriculum-based and learning-based. So I think that those are separate, and it confused me looking at this of what are we talking about. The connection between MTSS and SEL may be why that is. And so then we come into PACE. I think this data is interesting to look at, but before I do, this is administered to all Council Rock students in 8th, 10, and 12, or is this optional? I guess, first.
It's all students, it's an anonymous survey.
Okay, so this is consistent, I mean, I even remember filling out things along this line, so I don't think it's really anything new. Are students able to opt out?
I believe they do.
Okay, all right, great. And then the data that we were looking at was that in some cases, it only seemed to be very broad. So I don't know if that's state data or if that's exclusive CRSD data. The only comparative data was that of marijuana usage.
I don't know, there's always state comparison data, is that your question?
No, I understand that it's administered across the state and administered within Council Rock. And so the comparative data in the slides that we looked at tonight only seem to compare marijuana use. It doesn't compare drinking, it doesn't compare vaping, it doesn't compare,
To the state?
or is that what we're looking at here?
Right, so the dots, there's always
Dots for
the
the
state.
state. The state for this year, because the lighter blues are
State
previous.
for this year, only for
Okay.
this year is in the report.
Okay, so within this, I notice a trend in the middle pertaining to marijuana. That's where the perceived risk is lower. But it does seem like students, both in the state and within Council Rock and over previous years, seem to recognize that drinking and smoking and use of prescription drugs that you're not prescribed are dangerous. And then the vaping, to connect to Mr. Hickey, seems to be over there on the right, but only for this year. So
They didn't ask the question in the previous.
right, okay. So it's nice that the state is picking up on that. And I think to the discussion of tobacco is on one side, cigarettes, vaping is on the other side, marijuana is in the middle, but vaping could be both tobacco and marijuana.
Yes.
Right?
Which is how they actually asked the question earlier, but yes.
Right, so I find that interesting, and I don't think that that's anything new also. I remember also being in school, being confronted with the fact of how marijuana compares to these other things, fairly or unfairly. So that seems to be consistent. So that was just sort of the understanding of some of this, that just observations that I picked up on and wanted clarity to make sure that everybody at home also knew it. Thank you.
Just a clarification for the color. We don't pick the colors, but the colors are from the assessments. So just to have a clarification.
Meaning from Dibbles and Acadia, right, the red and the yellow, the sort of traffic light colors. Yeah.
I mean, I know Ms. Gary had asked me that question at the pre-meeting, and should we change it to different colors? And I said, well, this is what parents are used to seeing, so it made sense. And even the words like at risk, those are statewide terms, right? And even federal terms. Just before we move on to I know we still have PSSA and we have state standardized high school Keystone data. There's been a lot of great discussion, information, a lot of vocabulary, and I just kind of want to summarize some of the key things. So as we move into November and report card conferences, especially at the elementary level, we talked about, it was great that Mr. Hidalgo brought up the question because it was one of my notes, and one that we had quite a bit of discussion about is that communication piece, that families and parents and guardians are aware along this process. You know, we talked about the staff and teachers learning and relearning some of this process, and that along that journey that we include the parents and families as well. So the MTSS, maybe, as Mr. Roosevelt said, didn't like the medical term, but if we could call it, maybe it's a check-in, right? And then in terms of clarification for everyone here and those that are listening at home or will listen to this, the universal screener is given to every student in Council Rock. We're talking at the K-6 level for the MTSS, and it's given 3 times a year. So the beginning around September, middle around January, and then toward the end of the school year around May, I'm going to say, maybe after the PSSAs. So I guess from my understanding and all the discussion I've had, it's kind of like a tool for teachers and for parents. They'll get the knowledge of where their students or children are. as a guide to like teaching, learning, reteaching, and then identifying any students that may need to move on to have other support. So, you know, you move from the universal screener that's given to all to a diagnostic level that includes a variety of screeners and/or assessments that addresses individual needs of that child. And then following that up with that progress monitoring, which is key to understanding if they're actually making progress and learning. Because I know we had a big discussion about screeners versus assessments, because we hear, I think, as parents, we hear the word DIBELS and we automatically think like that's an assessment and that's exactly where our kids are at our reading level right now and forever. But we have to get in that kind of mindset of thinking that is a screener that we are using as part of the MTSS, and we give it 3 times a year with benchmarks to help guide teaching and also to communicate with families and guardians about where their child or children are. Okay. All right, that's great. Thank you, I appreciate it. It's a lot. I'm sure we will have continued discussion as we move along the MTSS process. And I'm gonna let us move on, I think, Dr. Barnes with more data.
Yeah, it looks like we were having some technical difficulties.
Screen saver came on.
I'll do some filler talk.
You're on, Al.
Yeah, so we are gonna move on to the second phase of data. So Dr. Barnes is gonna speak to us about our placement results of both North and South. Then we'll speak about some of the Keystone results and some of the trend data that we see. And again, a little caveat asterisk, some of the data that we're presenting, I think just about all, except for the advanced placement, is not been finalized by the state. So the state hasn't, they put out some previews and Dr. Barnes has done an outstanding job working with the raw data, but you know, it's kind of why we have that disclaimer at the bottom of the slide that subject to change. As a matter of fact, there's going to be one cell that I'll speak of that we are going to just inform the board that there's a modification. You can do it?
No.
You good? We're good?
Bring the picture.
All right, so we'll start with, and if I may, just a little bit about advanced placement courses. We have 24 advanced placement offerings at both high schools, and they're across all subject areas, and just about all subject areas. And these are college-level courses. These are our most rigorous offerings. I've mentioned before to the board that we have, you know, a pretty stratified curriculum in that you have the foundations level, academic, accelerated, honors, AP. AP is our most rigorous, robust offerings, and it's a college-level course. Teachers have to meet certain criteria. There's a third-party college board that kind of standardizes the curriculum and the way things run with advanced placement courses. At the end of the advanced placement courses, God bless you, we have the AP test, and we have AP testing days that students look forward to. And basically their scores are anywhere from a 1 to a 5. Generally speaking, 3 or above is kind of an indication, if we want to put it in PSSA terms, as a proficient or advanced score. And it used to be, and things have changed a little bit at the university level, where if a student received 3, 4, or 5, there was a good chance that they were going to receive, it's not necessarily a tuition reimbursement, but the college would say, we accept you, and you don't have to take that calculus course. You don't have to take that literature course, because you've already demonstrated that college level proficiency. It still happens. The trend now is colleges are a little bit more selective in how they're handing out those tuition reimbursements, if you will. So you're seeing a little bit more of a need for a 4 or a 5. But in general, 3 and above is the standard for really some outstanding work by our students. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Barnes.
Well, that pretty much covers my AAT talk, so if you want to go ahead for the next one. And I'm not going to mention the thermometer. And the AP itself picked the colors of this graph, so I have no bearing on these. Good evening, and thanks for having me back, Ms. Khan, board members, Mr. Funk, Ms. Crawford, Dr. Sanko, for having me talk to you after dinner at night about educational statistics. Yeah, I tried to Google a funny joke about math and statistics to start off to lighten the mood, but it turns out there aren't any. So we'll just get right into the data. I decided we'll just start from the top and move our way down. Mr. Hickey had pointed out before, I think I'm probably more comfortable with the molecular level about things going on at the moment, taking a deeper dive into things. These data, of course, overview, things that are important to inform the public and the board, about how students are doing in general. So all of these things we're looking in the rearview mirror. And a point that I had made earlier is that I think going forward, we'd like to be in a position coordinating all of these data sources to put us in a position to better look forward instead of kind of doing autopsies on things that have happened before. With those qualifications aside, I think we can just get right into the AP results and then field specific questions later. So I broke out the AP results by North and South. First graph is North, and you can see that the blue bars represent the percentage of test takers who earned a score of 3 or better. And since the 2021 test administration, the percentage of students earning a score of 3 or more has increased steadily each year, and we're up to 97% of students who take the AP exams get that coveted 3 or above score. And you'll see over the 5 years depicted for North, 2024 yielded the highest percentage, was 97%. So, and on the right, you'll see a table, and the two interesting lines there are the number of AP course takers and the number of AP exams taken. And you'll see that those numbers have steadily increased over the 5-year reporting period. At Council Rock South, unless we're looking at a picture of a mountain behind me, a similar rate of increase was also noted. The percentage of students scoring 3 or better. The highest percentage of scores, 3 and above again, in the 5-year period also occurred in 2024. The general shape of the trends, knowing nothing else about the numbers on top, just shows that it is steadily increasing. In contrast to North, the chart on the right shows that there are a slight decrease in the number of students taking the AP classes over times and the number of exams that are taken.
All right.
So we've moved on to humbling experience for me as a statistician. Being 8 weeks into this, my first time doing the Keystones with it. Unlike a PSSA, which is kind of a once and done thing, the Keystone exams are banked to grade 11. And what does that mean? If a student scores below proficient on one of these Keystone exams, they have a chance to take it again. And the state takes the highest level when they're looking at things, the highest score, when they're reporting out Keystone scores to the public. So the best score replaces the module score that was below proficiency. In the graph you're looking at that, they bank it up until grade 11. So if you're looking at, say, 2025, that's a class of 2025, which means that they took that particular, or the scores were banked up until grade 11 of 2024, last year's results. So over the summer, the district gets a batch of raw data to look through to see how students are doing on these high stakes tests, the PSSA and the Keystone. And we were sorting through kind of like getting different numbers depending on how you counted the modules and In the preview to this presentation, I said I actually asked smart people to do it. But I've asked colleagues at the intermediate unit, and I've called the state, and I actually ended up on the phone this very day talking to the director of assessments for PDE. And he kindly suggested that we'll give you the final numbers. He's going to give me a sneak peek of the final numbers that the state calculated tomorrow morning. So, I asked him if there was any number of donuts that I could provide or coffee for his technicians. So as Mr. Funk alluded to earlier, when I get them, you'll get them. That's, it's just, we want you to look at the numbers. They're close, they're real close, but I'm pretty big on transparency. I don't want somebody to like look at it a week later, it's like, oh, look, they're gonna post these publicly, probably mid-November sometime. And I just don't want you to think we put numbers up there that, we didn't believe in. So when I get them,
Could I just jump in? So just a fundamental difference between the Keystones and the PSSA. The PSSA are grade level assessments. The Keystones are subject area assessments. So you have the 3 subject areas. So after a student takes that corresponding Keystone course, in our case in Council Rock, it's either Algebra 1, English 10, which serves the literature, or biology, then they take the Keystone examination. The difficulty in reporting results is, and I'll take, literature is pretty pure because that's English 10, everybody. But we'll take algebra, for example. Well, we have students in Council Rock that some take Algebra 1 in 7th grade. We have a large amount that take Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and then we have a large amount that take it in 9th grade, some in 10th grade. So as Dr. Barnes mentioned, that 11th grade cohort, what you end up having to do is go back years to see how students have done. Now, fortunately, our linkage system kind of has a best available score, which actually helps expedite things. But the scores themselves, and here's the other wrinkle I'll throw in there, COVID and the no testing years actually cause some issues when we report the scores. So some scores may appear kind of artificially inflated and others may be artificially deflated. I think I used the example last year, excuse my pointing for those at home, of the 54.2 in biology. And we said, okay, that's the graduating class of 2023. So they were 12th graders in 2023. And if you kind of backtrack, so they're 11th grade here, they're 10th grade here, they're 9th grade here. 2020, even though we have scores in those cells, that was a no testing year because of COVID. There was no testing in 2020. We reported no results after the next year. But that 9th grade class, that's when we offer, and again, biology, we offer it at 2 grade levels. You have a 10th grade biology and you have a 9th grade. The 9th grade happens to be the honors biology, who just historically speaking, those sections tend to score 90 to 95% advanced or proficient. Well, they weren't included in that group. So, take out 300 students. And another piece of data we actually just stumbled on today, where if I look at my 2024 algebra, it says 77.6. We actually think that's a lot lower. So we will get you the cleaned up data. And it's a lot lower basically because of the kind of the same rationale. If you go back, if those students were 12th graders in 2024, 11th grade, 10th grade, 9th grade, 8th grade, so we have about 200 honors algebra students in 8th grade at both formal schools. So you take out 400 students, it's actually a lot lower than that. And so I apologize.
Those students typically score very high if you're taking the honors algebra class in 8th grade.
So not trying to intentionally misrepresent the numbers, but that added confusion that happens with COVID. Here's another layer of confusion, then I'll stop with the confusion because it's been enough. At this time, the state was really struggling with associating Keystone scores with graduation. right? And there was a lot of conversation about, whether that was a requisite and you have to do that. And there wasn't necessarily a determination made. But when there were no tests in 2020, what the state said was, well, here's what we're gonna do. If you pass a Keystone course, so if you pass Algebra 1, in our case English 10, biology, by pass it's you don't get a failing grade, we will consider you proficient for graduation, right? So I think what we did with that 77.6 is we lumped in that automatic proficiency. So that's a little bit misleading. What happened later on is in 2023 was the first year where the state came out with, and you've heard me speak about this before, Graduation Pathway Act 158. So that is, again, it's going to associate the Keystone results with graduation, but the graduation pathways provided those 5 pathways for students to graduate, so that if you don't meet pathway number 1, which is Keystone proficiency, there are other means for you to graduate, whether it's through a CTE, industry credential test, whether it's admission into a 2-year college, a 4-year college, proof of employment. If you meet those criteria, then you can graduate through the pathway. So fortunately, last year was and Ms. Gary helped me with this, was the first year that we reported that to the State Act 158, and we accounted for 100% of our North and South graduates. We're preparing that report this year. So, just a little background.
Thank you.
Good?
Very good.
Okay.
Excellent. Going forward, the way these numbers actually play out into an assessment that actually might be more informative to the board is our Future Ready Index and our PVOS score. So these Keystone results get rolled into reports that actually have consequences, and it seems as though the state is leaning into those assessments. Those might be, for this level of overview of the scores, it might be best to report them because they modify it. So if you want a picture of your 11th graders that includes not only the Keystone results, but the PASA results and the relevant PSSA scores from 8th grade to kind of talk about growth from 8th to high school, they might be the more relevant thing to put out so that you can appreciate the health of the needs of your 11th graders at the secondary level.
PSSA.
So moving on to PSSA scores, as in the past, I've chosen red for ELA and green for math and purple for science. I do take requests for color. So each of those bars represents the percentage of students who earned a proficient or advanced score on the grade level PSSA and the relevant subjects. Because in the past when I presented in front of you, we've looked at trends. So one of the trends we've looked at is the growth since 2020, the score since 2020. So I decided to just honor that tradition and present them this way. I'm not sure if it would be more interesting to report some of the the Pennsylvania standards data to the board, or whether this gives you kind of a sense of the general overall questions that you might then want me to follow up on in subsequent meetings. So, okay, well, this is fine, but we want to know X, Y, or Z, and then convey that to Dr. Sanko, and then I'll be back for follow-up questions. So this is nothing more really than going through grades 3 through 8 and presenting the 4 years of data. So on the left here, of course, you have grade 3, and on the right is grade 4. Grade 4, you have science, so there's the 3 subject area presented. And also keep in mind that, as I said before, I've already shared these results plus the building level results, the educationally relevant results to the actual principals at the elementary and the secondary level. So So then if we can, I can keep it there, because the point I was also gonna make, that I kind of reinforced a point that I made earlier, is that each of these bars, particularly at the elementary school, is 10 elementary schools. So it doesn't reflect or describe any particular one elementary school. They vary between and among themselves each year and between years. The scores go up and down. So the needs of the students, they don't come from this bar. They come from the stuff that's already been done. And it's tempting to look at trends or whatever, and try to derive meaning, but the teachers start out every year wanting to get 100. So it's not like, boy, I hope we went up to 50 or 51. They want to sit down there, they want to teach every kid in their class to read, write, do math, so that they're all hundreds across the board. So it's nice when things are trending in a direction, and sad when they're not, but the year starts out pretty much the same. And it is so encouraging to see assessments taking place now at the formative level. So again, to reiterate a point that I made earlier, instead of giving you kind of it's like the weatherman telling you what went wrong or what right the day before, or the economist telling you why your portfolio went down. It's kind of like, what are the systems in place that we can develop kind of in the moment responsive assessments that can take place during the year, and over time use the data that we're collecting to predict these metrics that you're now seeing up on the board. So how can the district's educational health improve by linking these new measurements and measurement systems to predict these? And the ultimate goal is, I guess I'm haunted by my advisor's words that says, don't test, teach. So as much as possible, you want instructional time to happen and not necessarily testing time. So there's an extremely high interest in finding that real estate in the student schedule these days to put more instruction in there. So to find the tests that are giving you the most return for the educational goals that your district wants to have. That's where I think this whole process comes together. These things are taking shape now. I've been doing this for 8 weeks now, full time, and kind of like going into these different systems and then meeting Ms. Gary time and again and trying to link these systems together from the get-go. So as we're building them, they get built together and they interact with one another. So we can keep going to 5 and 6, and I guess we can all, and you have these slides, right? So you can see the bar, you can see the numbers. The PSSA numbers for 2024, I'll actually have my preview tomorrow morning, so if there's any variance in the 2024 number, that'll be resolved promptly. All right. So, one last point that I want to make, I made last year when we were looking at the math scores, and in the year before that. Each of these grade levels are, scores are standards specific. So let's say you look at the ELA graph, and you see those, in common parlance, the red bars are taller and the green bars are shorter. Can you then say that the students are better at ELA than math? And you can't make those comparisons. Those numbers just simply reflect the proficiency within that set of standards, and they're not comparable across subjects. And that's kind of a hard concept to get past sometimes, because they, well, look, that school's strength is, ELA. Those are the, so let's start working on their math. That's not quite the educational implications of those bars. That's reflecting mastery within a circumscribed set of standards. And they're not comparable across the standards. We had a discussion about math a little earlier, and that's one of the final points I'd want to make, is that in talking to Mr. Truesdale today, the chief of the assessment division, the math standards are going to be revisited. I think I'm in good company when I looked at the state scores, our scores, most district scores, and they kind of had this downward trend, like they start off with a very high rate of proficiency in third grade, and they trend down toward 8th grade. They're going to have another look at the math standards to see, because it's such a common phenomenon. The board of directors for Pennsylvania, set those standards. And Mr. Truesdale was very kind in saying, if they want to have a calculus test for kindergartners, my job is to make the calculus test for kindergartners. So he doesn't have insight or input into that board's decision, but he was very candid and helpful in his improving my education about the process, and he answered questions that we had kind of still left on the table about that math trend.
All right, questions. I think, Ms. Stone, did you have your hand up just a second ago? Okay, no, then maybe it was something.
I was going to ask about that, the math trend going down from 3rd to 8th grade, and I was trying to understand, you're saying they're reassessing the testing that they're doing?
Right, because these tests are tests of standards, so the board says students should have this level of proficiency. And so it was. That's actually the entire answer. So maybe the standards are too ambitious. It's.
So are those numbers dropping from 3rd grade to 8th grade across the state?
Yes.
Mr. Tate?
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Not absolutely every one of the 501 school districts, but enough that when I brought it up to Mr. Tuesday, he said yes, and then revisiting it, again. So.
That's perfectly logical the way you explain it, and I was wondering if the standards were adjusted across those 4 years, if that affected the scores in any way. And the other was, obviously, in most grade levels, the PSSA scores for 2021 were the lowest, and the trend line was like that. Was that an anomaly of COVID, or is that unexplainable?
Well, I mean, you could run the risk of attribution bias, because certainly it was a big deal in 2020, and did that cause the lower scores? Pretty much, I would say in most scores in the 2020, 2021, was the interruption responsible for it? Perhaps, but then you'd have to go kind of like to the next step. Was it like the instruction that was missing? Was it the panic or anxiety? Was it the home variables that were disrupted, loss of jobs, whatever other stressors might have been on families at that time? Reintegrating socially into a school. They might have changed grades, when they were out for COVID. They're coming into a brand new school. So not only do they have the academic changes that people have, in the best conditions, say going to middle school and going to high school, that's a tough bridge to make on anything. So then you add that in there. So yeah, I mean, the scores speak for themselves in the respect that they were pretty much generally the lowest in 2021, and then they've improved as a trend pretty much across the board.
Thank you.
Ms. Polly?
Yeah, these scores are not good. And when you say that they're gonna change, because the scores are low in math, the state is considering changing what, the standards? So we score low and they change the standards to meet, like, I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me.
No, the state does this anyway. They revisit like the science standards, they revisit the math standards. They do it as a course of business. Like every 5 or 10 years, they review standards. And they're doing it anyway. What I was specifically saying is the trend in decreasing scores across the districts was pervasive enough that at least one of the persons responsible for assessing state competency in math noticed it too. And was hopeful that when they realign the expectations for what an 8th grader should know about math, what a 7th grader should know about math, and on down, at the 3rd grade, that you might get less of that decreasing trend and more a trend based solely on the instruction that you provide in the community.
Have they changed over the years so much? I mean,
They haven't changed at all. The standards have been in place since 2015, I think.
and the scoring is going down?
Again, it's very precise to say that most districts had a fairly good result meeting the 3rd grade standards for math. They had, as a whole, as a collective whole, less success in meeting 4th grade standard. Lesser still success in meeting 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th graders. And how that looked was that if you looked at 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, we saw some of those diagonally pointing down lines that we saw last year. A lot of the states saw those too. I had one graphic, I think, from the first time I met you folks that had a black bar under that showed, even though we were above the state averages, it was also trending down parallel to ours too, from 3rd through 8th. So we're never a district that takes comfort in, we beat the state, you know, we have high standards, so, and 100 is the goal. So they're not realigning it necessarily because the scores across the state, across the year. So it wasn't just last year, it wasn't the year before, it was since the last standards revision in 2015 that you had those kind of, the 3rd graders did better than the 4th graders, then the 5th graders and the 6th graders, the 7th graders, year after year after year after year. So.
I mean, that's not a Council Rock problem, it's a national problem or state problem for sure, but what can we do to reverse that? Because this is very low. I mean, especially for math. 7th and like as they get older, I mean, we're not meeting like 50%. It's like just.
Actually, listen, again, your point is well taken, because, as a math person, but the point was that we were getting a good measure of maybe standards that weren't set correctly. Maybe they had set the target wrong, and our measure of success at meeting that tough standard was actually good. We would have loved it to be 100. However, they're looking at those trends and data and saying maybe we didn't fully anticipate what 8th graders should know. So let's fast forward again to the Keystones and the PBOS and the growth scores. They generally look good for both high schools, very good. We have a high graduation rate. There are signs that the math PSSAs may not have been, the best indicator of math skills. We have students leaving this district with wonderful math skills. So, yeah, it's almost like conceding defeat, though. I actually feel that behind that, why can't we do it? Why can't we get 100? and I just think that they didn't anticipate, or set the mark correctly, and they're just doing their normal course of business, and I think they're going to realign the standards, with what, eighth graders should know. Maybe they reevaluated that, and I don't know, I don't have any more insight into that, or give the, glimpse of, the inner workings of the board for sure. What their motivation is, or what the outcome will be. Could be worse, or, the standards could be more rigorous. I don't know that to be a fact, so.
Stone?
Yeah, I'm looking at those numbers, and I'm wondering if we again would be looking at individual schools to see if there's any major differences at each school, because I would hope that we would be intervening where the students need intervention. And I think some of the numbers are vastly different depending on what school in the district. Is that how? And then some of those averages might look differently if, the outlier wasn't in those numbers.
Yeah. Yes. The data at that level looks different. I mean, you look at that bar and it doesn't really talk about any one specific school. So the first order of business for this administration was get it out there to the teachers at that level so that they can use it. They can see the 5 standards that go into that math score. And I gave them a 23 versus 2024 comparison of the students' percentage in their building on those standards, so that they can see which ones went up, which ones went down. So then that can guide Ms. Gary's efforts, and the curriculum coordinator's efforts, the principal's efforts, the teacher's efforts at kind of saying, oh, well, this happened because X, Y, or Z, or let's try this, so that they have, coming into the school year before this board meeting, weeks before this board meeting, they had that information available. So the buildings are different. They have different need areas in different standard areas, and they have that information. That's very important. It would be a longer still meeting to go school by school. And we don't really want to single out any school community, because it is different from year to year, and everything. 3 years ago, when I first began addressing this group, there were differences between certain segments of schools. So that differed between feeder elementary schools for South and North, and the trend. So yeah, there are certain specific areas, but it all comes down to the building. It all comes down to the teachers all wanting hundreds on these tests. It comes down to giving them the tools they need through MTSS or through kind of a micrograin analysis of what the state's expectations are with regard to math performance, ELA, and science. So.
Okay, Mr. Hickey?
Yeah, and I'll bring it up again. I'm really curious to see those individual scores, because what you want to make sure of is that we're doing things consistently across the district. If one school is doing, their scores are higher, what are they doing different than another school or are they doing things the same, and it's just a matter of the students in the school? I don't know whether or not there's any kind of difference, but like I said, I would like to see that information to try to, what are we doing? Are we consistent across the district in the way that we're delivering the education? So as I said, I really can't do a whole lot with the data, just looking at those graphs. I'm really curious to see what that data is as it relates to the schools, the northern end of the district, the southern end of the district, and also how it propagates from year to year to year. I mean, I'm a big believer, if we're doing poorly in 3rd grade, especially in math, if you only understand 80% of it in 3rd grade, when you get to 4th grade, it's gonna be 70 when you get to fifth grade, you know, it's gonna be, you know, so maybe our concentration should be in those elementary levels to really try to drill down on those skills into third and fourth grade, so when they hit sixth grade, that they have that foundation, you know, to improve. So like I said, you know, until I see the individual school data, I mean, to me, I don't really care how we do against the state or anybody else. I care how we do in Council Rock and how we do among ourselves. So once I have that data, that'll be great. You know, and I'll appreciate your expertise on your thoughts as to differences and what could possibly be, you know, the causes and solutions to it.
I mean, not surprising that I've, you know, started down that path already. So, you know, I look forward to, at some point, you know, more fully developing that. A lot of the, you know, as educators, as, you know, school board members, you know, we look to teachers and curriculum and school communities to build up those scores, and we have substantial influence in that. But there's also a social cultural context in which these scores occur. My kids went to middle school that was a lot lower than our middle schools in terms of the numbers that you would see if I gave you building level scores, and yet they max out on their SATs. And I imagine that story, you know, repeats several times over. So the education is out there, but it's maybe, I think actually might have been Mrs. Powell who raised the point a couple of years ago, was maybe to investigate what the parents' expectations are. What is the Council Rock education? Maybe, you know, if the parents were rocket scientists or data analysts, or, you know, or somebody who had that emphasis, had that, you know, this is the way you're going, it's going to be college, maybe that's going to be different than folks that said, well, you know, I own a successful business, you know, and I didn't do well in math either. Or, you know, there might be a belief system or kind of a cultural push, you know, one way, and it might come down to that. It might come down to variables that don't have something to do with MTSS or instruction. We have control over those, and your point's well taken, that what we can do as educators is max those things out and see, and take a look at some of those. So I don't know that to be true.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the factors that nobody ever really mentions, and it could be a possibility, the socioeconomic relationship within our district or across our district.
Well, how long have we got? No. I mean, but this is a phenomenon that's been known since the 60s. You know, that's been studied repeatedly. I've repeated it. I've correlated the district scores, you know, with median home price. And you get a very, very high correlation that we would dream about having. So does that mean that you give people more expensive homes and they get better? No. Maybe we could try it. I don't know. But the point being is, that, again, it's not about income per se. You know, it's about the conditions in their cultural expectations about what they're going to get out of an education and how much they want to push for it. So I had a very bright intern several years ago. She went to school in the middle of the state. And the only people that showed up at her college fair was like the Army, Penn State. And you go to a college fair like North, we're trying to find room to put tables, you know, for the people who want to come and get our graduates. That's where I worked for, you know, for 24 years. So it's just about expectations of where your education will take you. I believe that's part of it. And that's Tom saying that that's something maybe we could look at.
I spent quite a lot of hours in Excel this week, diving into this PSSA data, and I'm not a data analyst, and so it's challenging. But I did break it out by school, and I did break it out by kids who have IEPs in each grade level and by economically disadvantaged, because the data is available publicly. And so I did all that, really dug into the numbers by grade, by school. And then that was it, I was out. You know, that's like the extent of how much I can, I need somebody smarter than me to look at that and say, okay, here's how we improve it now, and here's where we go from here. I think to Mr. Hickey's point, you know, we would all like to see the scores increase. It is really interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting to see the trends, to see the differences among schools, but none of that means a whole lot unless we can act on it. So, you know, for what it's worth, that's what.
Oh, excellent point, yeah. And those data are publicly available, they are, yeah, so.
Ms. Roosevelt?
Thank you. I think one thing that is, whether it's advisable to do this or not, at least it's a consistent 30,000-foot aggregate. When we look at the DIBELS, when we look at the PSSAs, when we look at the Keystones, and even to some degree when we look at AP, not so much, but there is approximately 20 to 30% of our student population, regardless of grade, that is effectively basic, below basic, or not proficient, however you want to categorize it in one area. And so on the one hand, that's really good because all of this data, MTSS or whatever, is tracking, it's consistent. So picking up on what Ms. Soseki was saying, as far as how to make it actionable, when we look at the testing scores of PSSAs, and you say, you can't really look at these trends, it's based upon expectations. And we hear that parent expectations and state standards are being reviewed. And we've heard the axiom, you can't teach the test, you've got to educate. Fine. I think perhaps, I've been pondering this, how does a school district take this data and make it actionable? And perhaps one way to look at it is of analyzing how well our curriculum and our teaching instruction are at communicating and meeting the standards or exceeding the standards. We all want to see hundreds, I'm glad to see that, but we also know that it's not practical to get every kid in every school at 100. It'd be great, but we know reality is a little different. So seeing the difference between the beginning and the end, right, that delta is, I think, is important. So that's perhaps, I don't know, just one thought. Is it relevant to say, to use these tests, use this data, to not only understand where, which is the MTSS seems to be driving at, where are the students that need more help and how do we provide that help? But also evaluating both the curriculum and the instructional materials to teach this, to teach these standards at the same point. And I don't know, do we take the same level of evaluation that we do of our students upon the teachers? I know that that's a touchy subject, and I understand that we've got great teachers, but to Mr. Hickey's point of trying to figure out why, right? Somebody that may be more socioeconomically advantaged might have higher expectations, maybe, maybe not, and they might have more means to provide additional education in the form of tutoring, maybe, maybe not. But that doesn't mean that a family with less socioeconomic advantages doesn't have similar expectations and doesn't have similar, based upon those expectations, priorities and how to assign their costs. And it certainly doesn't indicate that one side is smarter or not as smart as the other. And that's where I think Council Rock can shine. Council Rock's had a wonderful tradition of education over a long time, and taking individuals of a array of different family expectations and different socioeconomic ability and being able to teach them a subject. So that's where I'm wondering, I'm arriving at, fairly or unfairly, this is the question, is this fair? To look at this data like this and say, is this a way of grading our instruction? Both the materials that we use to instruct it and the individuals and the methods of which we instruct it to the students. Is that what we take away? Because if we say you can't really look at all this data and make it comparable, and we're gonna reevaluate the standards, which may be code for lowering it so that everybody can feel good about where they're tracking, I don't think that that's education. So that's the question. Can we use this data to evaluate our means and methods of education?
Well, I mean, that's a big one. Certainly our, we have our supervision and evaluation in place, and we are absolutely taking a look at our classroom instruction and best practices. I'll just give you an example I was thinking of when you were speaking, like the PLCs that we've spoken of at the high school level, at least when you have like subject area teachers meeting on a regular basis, and then if they're doing it right, which our folks are, they're developing formative assessments. We're talking a lot about formative versus summative, that are the same. So they're, and ideally, and we talk a lot about being lock, step, and barrel, and we like that. That's a good thing, certainly when you have two north and south high schools. However, teachers do have their individual nuances, and just as there's a varied amount of learning styles, there's a varied amount of teaching styles. And that's a good thing, because people learn differently and people teach differently. But anyway, back to the point, when you have a common assessment, the PLCs can meet about that. And it might be, and it's intuitive to think this way, wow, you got vastly different results than I did. Why is that? It's about the ask. And there could be the results doesn't mean that I didn't teach it well or you're a better teacher. Because there could be 25 other variables that impacted those test results. But it's a worthy, meaningful conversation, because perhaps now I learned something, but oh wow, so my kids missed the boat on this concept. Your kids did phenomenal. We were at the same place. Talk to me about that. That's the value of PLCs. So, and I think that's what you're speaking of. So we do those things. We evaluate our staff. PVAS is a score that you've heard me talk about before that we don't talk about enough here. It stands for Pennsylvania Value Added. It doesn't only measure achievement. Achievement's great, right? But it also measures growth. So now you have an X and a Y axis. And so our high achieving kids, the kids that always do well, the advanced placement kids that we talk about, that's wonderful. But they also need to move along the continuum. And it certainly is very applicable to our students who aren't achieving as well. But how did they grow? We'll have students who don't demonstrate proficiency on these high stakes tests, but have demonstrated significant growth. And that's what PVAS reflects. When I was principal at Council Roxdale for 15 years, we're kind of, percentage points below North. And I'm a competitor. But I looked at those PVAS scores. And I saw, and by the way, teachers get evaluated on PVAS scores, classroom teachers. And then I would see, again, back to the color coded, blue was the pot, that you're moving kids where they should move. Not only are you making 1 year chronological growth, they, in those cases, are exceeding that. That's a blue, and that's closing the gap. So I don't know if I answered your question, I just gave you some examples.
Well, yeah, I mean, to some degree, I think you did. To another degree, you added additional elements that we have spoken about, which I do think has a place around this table and on these presentations, which would be great if we do put it in. And I think that, unfortunately, this type of evaluation does take time to get more data set and to rule out some of these other variables and figure out the why. And PVAS, I think, is a contributor to figuring that out. But unfortunately, I think there are kids that are struggling now in all different grade areas, and those parents want to know, what can I do now? How can I help my kid now? And evaluating how this PVOS is helping teachers do that is one thing. That's kind of, I think, the role or partial role of the board is to be the mouthpiece for our constituents and all of the parents within the district, and be able to represent them. So I would like to see some of that PVOS stuff and some of this drilling down. And, you know, I mean, I don't know, maybe an evaluation of time. Knights for Knowledge has been amazingly successful. So, you know, what is Knights for Knowledge doing that the other classrooms aren't? I don't know if that's something that should be looked at. How much class time is going toward instruction that is meaningful and absorbable? I don't know.
These are all great questions, and I think tonight's discussion centered so much on programming and data and assessments, and it really led up to this point, which I think it's important just to continue to say, it's one piece to a very important puzzle. At both the elementary and secondary levels, we're looking at all the data that we referenced and more that we didn't tonight. So we appreciate that. But again, with PSSA, it matters, it's an important piece, but we're looking at other things too.
Yeah. To Ms. Oseki's point, making it actionable, I think we can all agree.
Ms. Polly?
Yeah, so Ms. Ozagi sent me the spreadsheet, and I didn't realize you did all this work yourself. I thought some of it we're gonna see tonight. That's what I made a comment earlier. I mean, there's quite a few really big differences among schools in different grades. So I'm surprised we didn't see the data tonight. I mean, it should be part of this discussion. And I don't know what the action would be, but it's very important to see the differences between schools.
What's that?
Maybe you can send your spreadsheet to everybody.
If I felt like I was a statistician and I felt 100% confident, I would, but, you know, the last thing I want is to circulate a spreadsheet and people are like, well, you made a
Yeah, so to be fair, in the meeting I had, the pre-agenda meeting, you know, Dr. Barnes knows, I said, so these things are going to come up at the meeting, and he was fully aware, and he said, you know, whatever the board asks me to do, I will do, and this will clearly not be the end of the conversation, it's an ongoing conversation. I do want to state that, you know, we're talking about the PSSA, and I think, you know, I've been in a situation where teachers were teaching to the test, right? It's one test. We just had this discussion about how the standards are set by a group of people that sit on the other side of the state, and then they're also reassessing if they know what the standards are. So we're talking about this one test that is a standardized test given by the state, created by a table of individuals that think this is what the kids need to know in third, all the way up through the Keystones. And it's one test, it's one day, it's 1 week. I think it's, although this information is relevant, it can guide us and kind of teach, you know, lead the direction of the district in planning for curriculum or instruction or training for teachers and giving parents, you know, it's one thing that I get every year. I get home, it's like, okay, this is a PSSA score, so I look to whatever it is I as a parent need to do at home. But I kind of, as a former educator and sitting here, we're talking about education, I wouldn't want to see personally in a way where we're using this one test of this 1 week of the entire school year to guide how Council Rock teaches our students of 10,500. So I just want to add that as we move on, and I know there's still more data because we have not talked about the special education. I appreciate Dr. Barnes to actually adding this slide after our pre-agenda meeting. Like I said, we need to have a little bit of something else before we continue the conversation. So thank you.
I didn't finish.
Oh, you weren't? Okay. Sorry, Ms. Polly.
But I agree, it's a standardized test, and there are always issues. A lot of students are not good taking standardized tests, so it is one data point. But I also want to say that we are here for all the students, not only the ones that do great, that they're going to do great no matter what, but we have to pay attention to everybody and to have whatever percent that is not getting to the standards that they should, that should be something that we have to think very hard about. How can we be here for everybody? And I know this is part of what you're trying to achieve. I just want to say that I think it's very important not to lower standards, but to increase the standards and be here for all the students in the district. Thank you.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to be in a position to admire the problem, so we, drilling down and seeing things is one thing, and it's useful in some cases, but unless it guides change, it's kind of a meaningless undertaking. And it gets back to the earlier point. I think what you're talking about is reaching everybody as though we expect them to be, the best student in math that they can be, the best student in ELA that they can be, regardless of what their status is, whatever school they go to. It's and I'm not advocating for the lowering of standards, so it's not like I'm calling my senator and saying they're too high. They are what they are, and our district is held to that standard. So it is what it is, and we all assume that it's a legitimate standard and we work towards it. So I'm not excusing it or saying it. I'm just saying one reason could be. So.
Wait, Ms. Dunn, did you have?
The one thing, though, I agree, we shouldn't be lowering standards, lowering our expectations, but, or making some comparisons, but it's clear to me by looking at this data that math is clearly a problem that I think we should be focusing more on. Although you're saying that scores jump up in high school. In math. I thought that's what you had said, that they seem to, improve vastly. But Al, you said is it PLA, this professional leadership?
PLC.
PLC?
Professional Learning Community.
Is that across all schools?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if you're looking at data where there are some schools really doing well, can those teachers be working with teachers in schools that are not doing very well in math? And maybe there's something in how they're being taught that is useful, as opposed to, I don't know what they do in these PLC meetings, but if it was more focused and targeted on some of these scores, they might be able to,
Those are subjects for like department meetings, and we have mentor programs and things of that nature. By and large, our staff are outstanding, and they're really, they tend to hit the mark with their students. As I mentioned before, might one teach a particular unit a little bit more effectively than another, and that's when it's important to collaborate.
well, because math builds. If you don't get it today, you're not going to get it tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And we have curriculum coordinators too that,
Yep.
can even things out across.
I could just say, if you could hold on until after your session, I'm gonna go all through our curriculum and assessment systems. So a lot of questions you're asking, I could provide those answers to, so that is coming up.
Maybe I've been
Thank you.
this whole time.
Forgot how long this.
Sorry.
From your computer.
I'm so okay, all right. Is this your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
just super duper quick. Because I did take a look at the numbers, and there was a lot of variation by school, which I kind of expected to see, but what surprised me, and if we do dig into this deeper, what I would be curious on is the differences in grades when the data was for all students versus those with IEPs. And I think there is an expected differential, but in some cases ours was quite a bit larger, even double what the state expects the differential to be. So that to me was an unexpected concern that I'd like to learn more about.
Okay.
Okay.
So as we committed, we would include a special education topic on each of our education committee meetings. As the board knows and our community knows, we're in transition right now, looking to move forward and finding a new director of special services. So Tom Barnes and I are going to tag team the special ed topics. And to give Tom a chance and a break from speaking about PSSA, I will go first. We had a meeting, a public meeting on September 24th, and we committed to several things during that meeting. One of which was we would give the parents of children with special needs an opportunity to come together as soon as we could schedule it. We've scheduled it for October 29th. I think it's important to note that students who fall under Chapter 14 of the Pennsylvania School Code are the folks that received this invitation, the series of emails that we sent out. So children with or parents with children who have 504s, 504 is not a special ed initiative. It falls under IDEIA, and I'm thankful to our special ed folks joining us here tonight so they can help guide us through this. During that night on the 29th, the special ed team and the cabinet team will facilitate that conversation, that CPAC meeting. You've heard before that we have a special education plan due by May 1st of this year. Included in that planning, that night we will talk about backwards planning with a due date to PDE on May 1st. It has to get in front of the board for approval, and it has to be advertised publicly for 30 days. So our team of special ed supervisors are starting to work on what we have an obligation to input as a district, but we will be seeking input from the parents and asking them to prioritize some goals for the special education plan that once again is due on May 1st. We committed in our comprehensive plan that we would have a special education parent committee. And part of that night on the 29th, we'll be talking about that committee. And at that time, again, we will be asking the parent group and listening closely to what they have to say in terms of topics of importance to them. We want to know what's out there that they want to share with us. I'm very thankful to several of our special ed folks and our parents. Some of our parents hosted a gathering last night at Northampton Library, and the topic was on inclusive practices, and there was a professor from Rider University there. Unfortunately, I was not in town, I wasn't able to attend, but we had 3 or 4 folks from our special ed team who felt that it was a worthwhile and good time spent to listen to contribute to, and learn from that expert as well as our parent community. So we look forward to gathering from 7 to 8:30. On the 29th, we will be meeting in the cafeteria at Council Rock High School South that night. And the parents of, once again, parents of students with IEPs who received the previous emails, we will send another email blast out tomorrow reminding families that they're invited to join us on the 29th at Council Rock High School South. Tom, did you get enough time to catch your SSA breath? I'm excited to dive back into this. He never stops giving. One of the things that had come up in the September 24th meeting is they were looking at the accountability reports that our district sends to the state, who in turn sends up to the federal government to show our compliance with the federal special education law. One of the metrics that they use under indicator 3 is the student's performance on the standardized assessments. They report out on grades 4, 8, and 11. Because my confidence in the 11 score wasn't high enough, I didn't put it before you tonight. But I would be able to do that as soon as tomorrow, depending on when that report arrives and I'm able to work on it. But I thought if the community was interested, particularly in that metric that we are providing for accountability, that this would be a good one to present. As Ms. Khan mentioned earlier, could take requests. So if there's a metric that isn't, that you would rather have reported out to better inform that the stakeholders in our community, who want more information on it, we can find. This is because it was something that they brought up and it's something that we report out in the process of doing business. I thought those two metrics would be important to share. So this is the PSSA performance. As Ms. Secchi pointed out, we're able to kind of disaggregate the PSSA scores by things like ELL, IEP status, and other variables. And what you're seeing in the orange bars is the PSSA performance of the disaggregated section, so just the students with IEPs. It's going to reinforce a point I want to make in just a minute, but all students with IEP. So you might have trouble, say, pronouncing the letter R. You might have a specific learning disability in math or reading that makes it particularly difficult for you to achieve in those subject areas, but it's not disaggregated that much. What it is, it says students with IEPs. And I may as well, just having that introduction, and just say that the constellation of students, the proportion of, say, students with the identified disabilities, autism, specific learning disability, intellectual disability, speech and language impairment, orthopedic impairment. I'd ask Casey to count along with me. but there are about a dozen categories, and of those, 9 usually have students in them, and some more than others. This constellation of students that take the 4th grade, or the composite of students, the proportions of the students in those categories differs between grades 4 and 8. And it's important to realize that when you say a student with a disability, it's not just, it's not a reference to a specific person that has homogeneous needs, that has the same needs as every other student, just identified in that little box that says IEP, check, and the number there. I mean, these students have vastly different educational needs. And when I'm reporting these numbers to you, I'm nervous for 2 reasons. Number one, it's a relatively small number of students that fit into those boxes. In fact, on the aggregated state reports, I don't know if you saw this or not, but some boxes have zeros in them. That's because if 10 or fewer students in a school take the test, the state doesn't report it because that could make them personally identifiable. The reason the score is low is because it was Johnny's fault and misattribution. So the small numbers mean that those numbers jump around for no other reason than just simple math. When you have smaller numbers of a diverse population of students, the number is going to fluctuate a lot from year to year. So it makes me nervous, like talking to you about these numbers for the truth. So it's a great starting point. I would like to actually go the next step and just kind of break it out by disability category. And even then, it's not like you've met a student with autism that you know every student with autism. Every student, general ed, special ed, has differences. And that's just the way it is. I'm always nervous putting them into a box, IEP, and now we've explained it. And we've talked about our special education program, which goes miles beyond, just, reading, writing, and math. So those qualifications aside, I just compared the 2023 to 2024 expected numbers based on my math, from the raw scores I got, the finalized numbers coming as soon as tomorrow. For grade 4 ELA, grade 8 ELA, grade 4 math, and grade 8 math. The red number with that black horizontal bar next to it, that's the federal standard that they would like us to meet, so that on indicator 3B, they can say met expectations or met target. So for example, using just the orange bars on 3 out of those 4 reported scores, we met the target. And on the last one, we just missed, but we missed. If on that grade 8 math score, the target stays about the same, I didn't not put it in there to keep you in suspense so that you would invite me back. I don't have it yet. So when I have it, I promise I will draw it. I expect that we will then meet all those 4 categories. I don't know about grade 11. I'll know tomorrow, and when I can have confidence in that number high enough that I can share it, I'll do exactly that. So because it was meaningful to the stakeholders that attended that meeting, I thought it would be a good place to start, not end. So as we go on and you're in touch with your constituents, as our special ed supervisors, you're in touch with their families, if there is some kind of educational progress that we can report on a metric, we can develop a metric to show progress, I'm all in for that. But the diversity of that group of students just has to be respected. And just, in those numbers, again, just saying that, they're, that this describes them all. Well, it just doesn't. And it's going to move around a lot from year to year. So, your point about the difference is very well taken. Sure, it is there. In fact, that's one of the indicators as well, is the difference between those 2 scores. There's not another PSSA slide.
So if I could just reiterate what I mentioned earlier, there will be a reminder sent out tomorrow regarding the October 29th CPAC meeting. It'll be held at Kells Rock High School South. I do want to note that when the reminder goes out tomorrow, an agenda will be attached to it. And also note that for privacy and confidentiality, we will not be recording this. This CPAC meeting, and for people that are paying attention tonight, they can mark their calendar for December 10th. We will be meeting on Tuesday, December 10th at 7 p.m. as a follow-up meeting to that.
Okay.
If I may, one quick question.
Yes, Mr. Tate.
It's interesting because I was thinking when you said that, Tom, about the end for each one of those years is not a big number. Does that number decline from 4th grade to 8th grade? As in, like, the students age out of IEPs? Is that number significantly different?
My sense, and maybe Casey can weigh on it, Dr. Black can weigh in on it too, is that it increases.
That's right.
Yes, but to your point earlier, you're right, it does increase a certain point, it also switches. And so at the younger levels, we see a lot more learning disabilities that we're identifying and reading and math. And those they may exit out of, we figured out a way to teach them
Right.
appropriately. But at the middle level, we see a lot more emotional disturbance kind of things, so it is different.
Thanks.
Tammy?
It's me again. I know it's late, but this is the most riveting part of the evening. You have a handout that is coming around. And in this, just to give you a little background as everybody is getting that. As you know, I came to the district last year, and curriculum at a district level is a very unique position because people speak of curriculum, but there's actually a lot of the basis of things that happen are in the state and with legislation, and it just makes me smile. I'm very happy with the conversation you're having and the attention to standards, because you have to understand standards to understand education, so it just makes me very happy and fuzzy inside. So what I did is I came into the district, you do kind of a low-level audit of the systems that you have in the district to see what kind of position everything is and how everything is related. So coming in, my notation with everything in regards to this is, the work started last year and it's still continuing, but the basis of all the systems working together are the comprehensive plan from the state. So there's many different plans that are put together, such as you said, the special education plan, the gifted plan, professional development. So in the comprehensive plan, it's looking at a period of time for the district to say, you know, working with the committee, working with different stakeholders to say what's important, and then every so many years, you're reviewing it and then you're redoing it. So this first part of everything is just the purpose behind it. This is directly from the comprehensive plan. And the second part are the goals and actions that were decided since 2023. So this isn't new information, but I put that there kind of for reference. The new information really starts on the page that says a curriculum overview. So the kind of graphic that is put together is all about quality control for curriculum, which is exactly what you guys are talking about, which makes me fun. So the three parts, the three sides of the triangle represent the written curriculum, the taught curriculum, and the assessed curriculum. And to have quality control, you need those three pieces to come together. So it starts with the written curriculum based on the standards. That becomes very important because it's identifying what our students need to know and to be able to do. The taught curriculum is making sure that what's taking place in the classroom is reflective of what was written, to say this is our focus. And assessment, I just want to caution with assessment because it's the poor one that always gets the negativity thrown at it. Assessment is a major part of curriculum because it asks the question, have the students learned it? And I give the example as a former high school social studies teacher, my colleagues, some of them would lecture and they could lecture the entire time. And then at the end, you want to say, what did the students take away from this? What did they learn? So early in my career, start giving the old 5-question formative quiz, your exit ticket. Do you remember what I was talking about in regards to the presidency of Teddy Roosevelt and then Taft and the interaction between the two? And you get that stare. Really? You're asking me this question? So that assessment piece becomes very important because it's creating the evidence to show that our students have learned it. So all the questions you were asking about the curriculum and the assessment, it all has to have this focus. And that quality control, it comes down to this, and that's been around for the longest time. So these different systems work together. So the overview of everything is kind of, this is the basic cycle of what it looks like. And it's just a data protocol, basically. You're reviewing and analyzing the curriculum. You're looking at the design and development of what is being asked of from the state and the standards. You're implementing it, you're monitoring it, you're collecting the data for it, and you're evaluating the program. These are all very essential steps in the curriculum. So going from that, I was tasked last year to come up with a curriculum review cycle. So when you flip the page, this is where it gets really interesting with that. I want to take a second just to tell you how standards are made, how they come up, because we have a lot of new standards coming. So what happens, we have two different organizations. You have our state legislature who makes decisions about Chapter 4. So you'd reference Chapter 16, Chapter 14, federal government, Constitution, 10th Amendment, not in the Constitution, falls to the states. So every state looks at things differently except for IDEA in regards to special education. So with that being said, our legislature, elected officials in the House and in the Senate will make the decisions about what needs to take place. So I'm going to go very specifically into some of the things that are coming up. But we also have a state school board. So the state school board is tasked with carrying out how standards take place. So just in a very brief synopsis of it, when the legislature says we need to update the standards in this, the state school board has the kind of process and procedure where they will gather the experts. And this is a major change that I'll be speaking to in regards to some of the standards. But the shift within the state now is who they're going to is looking at the national organizations. So all of our subject areas, you have the National Council of Social Studies, National Association of English Teachers. Everyone has national associations who come up with their standards based on their content areas. They also are now looking at exemplar states. So which states are showing the best standards and the quality that they want to bring into Pennsylvania? It wasn't always that way. That is how it is taking place now. Once that takes place and they come up with what it should look like in regards to new standards, the state school board will have open hearings in at least 3 different areas of the state where they invite people to come and give comment on them. So if it's more well-known, you're going to have a lot of people attend the meetings. One I'm going to talk to you about is Family Consumer Sciences is undergoing changes. They had to cancel some meetings because there wasn't enough people coming to have comment. So the experts are creating them. They have open meetings to bring in and to get people's feedback. It goes back to the state school board. They put everything together. That is made public, and then they have the hearings to see if everything is the way everybody wants it to be. So it goes through a very kind of strenuous process to go back into regulation, because standards are regulations from the state. We call them standards, legislatures will call them regulations. That then goes into Chapter 4, into the state guidelines. From there, it has to go to, I think it's called the IRC, the review committee. It goes into the monthly state Pennsylvania Bulletin of Legislation. And once it's published and through the review process, then they become official standards. So in a nutshell, it's a pretty big process. And what makes this really impactful of what I'm going to tell you, all the changes that are coming. So I was tasked with putting this together, and as you see all my notes on here, so kind of warm up your pens because there's a lot taking place that's coming. So the way I tried to put it together is starting with implementation of what we're currently doing, and then phase 1 and phase 2 are the things that are coming. The things that have the asterisks behind it: family consumer sciences, economics, financial literacy, college and career standards are all changing, updating standards. They are currently at that last phase of finishing the IRC and being published in the bulletin. The K-12 has the asterisk behind that because you've heard me over and over again talk about the steel. So you can't be leaving during the most exciting part. Oh my goodness. I don't take this as an insult. So the K-12 science begins the state implementation next year. What that means is that everything that has been put into place, all the changes we've come to with the pilots and everything like that, that test, that assessment we keep talking about for PSSA and for the biology, you're not going to be seeing those bars next year because this year is a field test. So the other change that took place with legislation is that the old grade bands switched. So when you look at how standards are put together, they scaffold on each other. So now how the state has it set up is K-2, 3-5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 through 12. So with science, if you remember me continually saying, it's changing from 4th grade to 5th grade. And the reason for that is because the change in grade band is moving from 4th grade to 5th grade. So that entire test this year is a field test. So you won't have the data for next year. The other piece, 8th grade stays and biology stays. 8th grade is being, a lot of the content is field tested, but it's staying in the same grade. Biology is also being field tested and updated. So what that means is, I was really trying to show you how the different grade levels, you could take it in 9th grade, the honors course you could take in 10th grade, which means you're going to have a great discrepancy again. So the kids in 9th grade this year taking a field test won't have scores, but the kids who take it in 10th grade the following years will have scores. So again, you're going to have these discrepancies in high school because of the grade level when it's being taken. So science takes place, well on our way. Everything is a go next year for state implementation. The other ones have impact, and we're going to go slow with it, but take it. So the state decides in policy what they feel is important for the entire Commonwealth and the economic health. A major push that they've had from about 2017 are the college and career readiness standards. So as both Dr. Morris and Al alluded to, the pathways to graduation, a piece of legislation that came through. Years ago, everything was based on PSSA scores. Then they changed and split PSSA into Keystone exams. So there was a whole project where they were going to expand testing. They drew it back and they said, we want everyone to get to proficiency, so there has to be remediation. When schools started pulling kids back into remediation, they were taking them out of college and technical schools, college career technical schools, the vocational schools. When that happened, legislature said this isn't good for the economy of Pennsylvania because we need skilled work. So they changed it to say, instead of just relying on the scores in those 3 areas in high school, we want to invest in creating college and career readiness. The one part of it rests in the college and career standards. The college and career standards offers 5 different ways to graduate in Pennsylvania, and all students have to meet one of those 5 pathways. The first pathway is straight up on your being proficient in advanced in Algebra 1, biology, and literature, which is usually 10th grade. What happens if you don't make it? The second pathway is a composite. We're going to combine scores, and if you hit a combined score, so you could have a proficient, you have to have a proficiency in 1, but you could be a basic in 2 others. It's a numerical combination score. That's your second way of making it. After that, pathways 3, 4, and 5 are determined by other factors. So it is part college and career readiness, it is part alternate assessment, and it's a combination of others. The third pathway is for students who attend CTE schools. So if they make it that they're in a program, NOCTI is the big test that they take at the end of their programs to see if they have made the qualification for that. That comes at the end of the senior year. So pathway 3 is if students are making the progress they need to be successful in the CTE schools. 4 and 5, alternate assessment and looking at a whole comprehensive look at different components to be successful. So giving the alternate assessments. So pathways 3, 4, and 5 are saying you have to have a minimum of being, meeting our criteria as a district. So if you have your passing scores, that allows you to go into these other pathways. Why that's significant is because of the change for college and career standards. In the first phase, the things that are happening, equally saying the legislature is saying for Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is saying we want our students to be successful after high school. Family Consumer Science offering the part of how you use your budget and how you do planning in a family sense. So looking at budget, looking at planning, looking at all different things that go into running a household. So those are new standards. Economics, there's 4 different standards in social studies. Economics is one of the standards. They've redone the economic standards to look at how it's more focused now on micro and macro economics and how it looks from a business sense and a world sense. Financial literacy, and this is the big one that has great impact. All of these are K to 12, but with financial literacy, they used to be voluntary standards. There's 9 different areas in Pennsylvania that have standards. Financial literacy, personal literacy is now required, the 10th one. So we have to put it across K to 12, but drum roll, the most important part is high school, because high school must have a standalone course worth at least half a credit. And it goes over things like banking, insurance, mortgages, what you need as an adult to be successful in life. So this is now going to be a required course for the 26-27 school year. This is very impactful, and it has implications for a great many things. So these standards then are impacting Family Consumer Science will be updated because they have new standards. You have economics being updated. So economics looks different across the grade levels. It is kindergarten, first, second, third, all the way up. In high school, it's localized to one course in 10th grade. The electives that are offered currently, we do have personal financial literacy. In the business department, we're looking at adding it in a math department to make it algebra-based. So all of these things taking place are the states saying we've reviewed this and we're actually upping standards to say what we want for the citizens of the Commonwealth. So this is really big to do. So when we say about like, well, math might be coming up, math is kind of different. Math and ELA are different because they're old and they go all the way back to the good old days, years and years ago, if you remember Common Core. So Common Core was a national movement. The state of Pennsylvania chose to do the PA Core standards, which are different, but they're kind of in line with the Common Core. So those coming up, it was a different way of looking at the standards. So both ELA and math have a different kind of perspective to them. What does this all mean is we have to look as a district in these areas of revising our content, of looking at what is, for standards, it's what students should know and be able to do. And then our assessments is saying, how do we know that they've achieved those standards? So this, although it looks, nice and pretty in a chart, is going to be all over the place. Because the other piece of legislation, what the state said, standards started back in like 1993. There are some standards that are still in the books from 2003 that haven't been updated. And back then, everything was very based on the state. It was, as a social studies teacher, one of the standards was teaching about different kinds of trees in central Pennsylvania. It was very, very kind of politically motivated in regards to the legislature deciding what to do. It is now moving to national standards, and it is moving to exemplar states. So knowing all of this, there's a lot of change that's coming to all of these different things. So the cycle is on paper right now, and we have to get all the systems together to make it as our workflow. So all of these we kind of went through, and I've been going with them with the curriculum coordinators, are putting all those pieces that you were asking about. It's looking at the data, it's doing needs assessments, it's saying, where are we? So as you go through these, they have different descriptors of the actions that have to take place, and then the deliverables that we should have at the end of it. So that it's not, a phase could be more than 1 year, but all these are put together saying, as you read through it, you'll be like, okay, now I get this. This is how we're going to improve. So it's looking at the data, it's looking at our students, and it's looking at our curriculum, it's looking at our instruction, it's looking at how we include all students, special education, EL, 504, English language learners. They're all in here, and how do we address all of these needs? The other piece of legislation, again, this is like the big drum roll, I think it was on Monday, the structured literacy piece that we talked about, the training of teachers for structured literacy you heard about earlier. The universal screeners that we were talking about, that piece of legislation is on the governor's desk, looking for the big piece. Will come back to budget to see how much is being put out there for everything. So it could be a little longer based on budget negotiations and talk with the Commonwealth. But that plan we are working on, and that plan includes birth through 12th grade. So it's not even just starting with kindergarten. It's making the relationship with what happens in the community from birth to 5 years old. So we're putting that whole plan together as well. So from the legislative aspect and the standards, there is a lot taking place, and then I'll be bringing a lot of this information to you, and it's driven, again, by the legislature. So the other part of it, you can't have curriculum if you don't have assessment. So putting this together, policy, and the policy goes back to Chapter 4 guidelines. You should have a district assessment system that you guys look at once every 6 years, and there's many different components to it. And a lot of this also has to do with transparency and knowledge, so that parents know and understand what all of this lingo and everything is, and that we also are really perpetuating a community of knowledge to say, why are we doing these things and how do we get better? So this graphic that you see is from the state of what your assessment system should look at and how you should use your data. So you start with the assessment, you go on to analyze, you interpret, you instruct, you reflect, you monitor. And that's how you get better. That's how you can say, is this curriculum working? Is the problem with our instruction? Is the problem with our resources? So it's having that data to make those decisions. And the goal is to put all of this on the website so parents can see and learn all of this. So the next part goes into, and these are all, it kind of referenced back to the comprehensive plan, because these were the things being asked in the plan. So it asks about the language of assessment. So there are a lot of different technical terms. You heard me talk about MTSS. You heard me say universal screeners, diagnostic assessments, progress monitoring. There's a lot of particular language in regards to assessments because they all have different purpose. You think of the two major brands. Formative is the assessment for learning that teachers are using to guide instruction, and the summative is the assessment of the learning. Did it take place or did it not take place? So what I tried to do is list all the different types of assessments that we talked about, and then what the summative assessments are. One of the big ones I added there too is the aptitude tests, because those at the secondary level, PSAT, SAT, ACT, ASVAB, are not particular to standards. They actually use different standards because College Board has their own standards, but those are all used for a different purpose and tie into our pathways to graduation as alternative assessments. So this just gives the descriptions for what everything is and the kind of the purpose behind them. So moving along, the really big document, the spreadsheet, what I did was put together all the different district assessments that we have and use. They are put together to show, the first column, what the name of the assessment is and if there's an acronym related to it. So the first one is DIBELS. What does DIBELS mean? It's the Dynamic Indicator of Basic Early Literacy Skills. And I also put links in them, so when this is on the website, if a parent has questions, they can go and find out even more information. Identify the type, because it refers back to that list of what they all are. Then most importantly, going into the grade levels where they're given, and the description of the specific assessment, and then how the data is used and when it's administered. So you could see all the different ones are here so people could learn as we're talking about what's given, why it's given, and how that data is used. So the last part of it, now that we know what everything is, when do we give everything? So we created elementary, middle school, and high school assessment calendars so that a parent can look and see at the elementary level when all those universal screeners are going to take place. And highlight it in red as that key for the PSSA science. In middle school, you start to see a difference because we had midterms, we had finals, there's more CDTs, you have the HMH growth. So again, as a parent, you could see all of those. And the last page is high school, all the different assessments we give. And I put on the voluntary assessments to kind of to say, well, it's voluntary, you could choose it. If not, it comes back to the pathways for graduation because those can be used as an alternate route. If you choose not to take the Keystone exams, and that's an essential for the pathways to graduation, you still have to take the courses and pass them, but this is one of the ways that if you take and get a certain score, the PSAT, SAT, ACT, you take AP courses, you take a dual enrollment course, that could meet the requirement to graduate if you haven't had those. Again, here we also have midterms and finals. So that's a lot of information to throw at you and to look at, but it's not complete. So the things that we still need to put into this plan is everything with MTSS. And what I'd like to put is to be very specific with the programs, the interventions we're using, and so a parent can really understand how the pieces fit together. The other thing, again, referencing the state, we have classroom diagnostic tools, which are the CDTs. They've been around for a long time. Those terms, and you've heard me keep saying diagnostic, it's drilling down to find. The diagnostic part for standards is the CDT. When the students take them, it's an adaptive test that I explained to you before. It takes longer, but it identifies the grade level based on standards of where the students are. And how it's supposed to be used is then to create interventions within our system to get the students to be able to be proficient. What the state is beginning, it's piloting this year, they're called Firefly. It is going to be a benchmark system. So it's not going to be adaptive, it's not going to look at where the kids are, it's going to benchmark against the state test. So from elementary school to high school, they would take a benchmark test. It's if you think of everything I described with MTSS, it's kind of like that, except based, instead of foundational skills, it's based on the standards. So that correlation value, so he's talking to Tom, is going to be really tight. So if the students are taking the benchmark test all along, we're seeing if they're meeting the standards all the way along. The other piece of information we talked about is PVOS, which is our predictor system from the state. We can use the predictive scores. We could look at our benchmarks to give us a better indication of how our students are going to do. So while we're in the trenches doing things, we have a greater impact to get them to be successful in those summative tests. So that's going to be piloting. We decided not to be part of the pilot and let them work out all the kinks because we have a lot on our plate right now. And then next year, see how everything went and what they're rolling out, and then start to see how that fits into the system. The last part I didn't put in here is anything kind of career related. We do give career indicators. It's mandated by the state. So in grades 5, 8, and 11, we have to provide different types of assessments, and we have to have 2 pieces of evidence from every grade, 3rd grade through 11th grade. Those we're going to put in because they're new standards. Don't want to put it in until we've revised the entire system. So there's a lot with the state with careers. That's going to be put in here as well. The last work we're doing is with report cards at the elementary level is to align our assessments, our grading system, and looking at all our data to make sure all the pieces are fitting together. If we're saying in the standards-based report card that you're exceeding expectations, you're meeting expectation, it has to clearly indicate the work of the standards. So we're putting all of that together as well. And the last piece is the piece that brings it all together. We create the curriculum, we create the assessments, as Dr. Barnes and I have been talking with everything, it comes down to how you are using your data. So the data teams, if it's PLCs, it's putting together how we work with principals, how we work with teachers, how parents are informed and know what everything means and stands for. So putting that whole data system together to lead school improvement. And that's what the state looks at, is school improvement. And that's what we as a community, on our stakeholder side, our students have to be aware of it, look at, and how important different things are. They have to have the metacognitive piece to say, okay, ooh, these are my scores, how do I personally improve? And then looking at building our program from that. So different systems, when you hear talk about Link It, looking at our data, looking at different data sources, it's putting it together for the success of everyone. In a nutshell, there's a lot of reading here. So this is
Yes?
there you go.
Thank you.
I don't think you took a breath. I don't know how you did it. I mean, it was.
This is the fun stuff. This is the
And now I'm gonna have to listen to it again.
I'm more than happy to talk about this. When I talk about it with teachers, the biggest piece of learning is, as educators, we tend to put everything in silos to say this is assessment, this is curriculum, this is, no. Everything in education fits together, and the more we define it and put it together, meeting with teachers for MTSS, they're getting very excited, because if spending the time say, these are what the different assessments are. These are the reasons we use them, and they're like, I never really put all those pieces together. I just looked at it as this, this, this.
Yeah.
And then the piece that goes with this is professional development. So everything we talk about, from the curriculum to changing the standards to what it looks like for implications for early childhood and family consumer science to macroeconomics, all of that gets put together. You want to say anything more of financial literacy? Because that's the biggest news.
I
That's
will,
the,
but first on assessment system, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe every 6 years the board has to,
yes.
right, so I do expect that you'll have something, board action with our assessment plan.
Coming.
In the near future.
As soon as everything's cleared up with the
Yeah,
state.
so that's one thing. Yeah, financial literacy, yeah. So the state has mandated this course, 26, 27. We've asked a lot of questions of Harrisburg, getting some information. It does not mean that if you graduate, like the graduates of 26, 27 have to have that course. Our understanding is it needs to be in the program of studies by 26, 27. So by our calculations, it kind of looks like, 'cause, you know, where's the rubber meet the road? When's it an actual requirement? It looks like it's an actual requirement probably for the class of 30, 31. We need to start offering it in 26, 27. And that's going to be a little problematic for us. We know our high school schedule is tight. Right now, we already have a developed course in our BCIT, Business Computer and Information Technology, that aligns very nicely, that would fit. That's an elective offering. Tammy mentioned we're looking at an Algebra 3, developing that course. There's also the potential that we could offer it through Family and Consumer Science and Social Studies. There's those economic components, and Family and Consumer Science has some of those business financial components as well. That might be a good idea to offer it more broadly, so that grades 9 through 12 could take that course. Different districts are going to attack this differently. They might make it, it's a mandated 11th grade class, but they may not be under the same credit restraints that we are. So we're going to come to you with our recommendations. We need to really flesh this out. You know, I foresee some administrations asking their school board, well, should we change our credit requirements, or what is this look? You know, how are we going to make this work? Where are we going to fit it into the schedule? So those are all unanswered questions, but more to come on the financial literacy class, 26, 27.
Great idea.
Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right.
So if I,
Sorry, no, go ahead, Dr. Sanko.
No, if I may, when Tammy, we were talking to Tammy about joining the team, there were 3 things that we spent a lot of time on with Tammy, and you're starting to see some of the results. A curriculum renewal process, a curriculum review process, and assessment. So Tammy and the coordinators and the teachers, and of course Nicole and Al, there's been a lot of time and energy and effort that's gone into this, and good thinking. And as you heard from Tammy a few minutes ago, sometimes the state just gives us some things and they say to us, you must, like this financial literacy course, and we just appreciate the agility of the coordinators, the teachers, and the three of you. So I'm looking forward to getting this finalized, get it on in front of the board, and getting it on the website so all of our families can see it.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Pate.
I have
Sorry.
just want to say, this is really impressive, and I love the systems approach, having it all linked to work together.
I agree. I think it's fantastic and overdue. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Tammy.
It's a lot of work. All right, we're almost done, I
Last
think.
agenda item, I'll be quick. So, just a brief update, I think it was the May 23rd last year meeting, we introduced to the board Project Adam and the Heart Safe program. It's a partnership, just as a refresher, it's a partnership that we are endeavoring with Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania. Our point person is our nursing coordinator, district coordinator, Michelle Adamas. She's working with Lindsay Flanagan from CHOP. They have started to meet every Wednesday night, I think, from 6 to 8. So basically what they are doing is they are developing plans for each building so that in the event of a sudden cardiac arrest, whether that's a staff member, a student, a community member, we will have a crisis response. So similar to what plans that we would develop for a critical incident, where if there was an intruder in the building, it kind of follows that kind of line of thinking where you have actual plans, designated folks filling different roles. So the first part is identifying the staff members in each of our buildings that are CPR certified. They form kind of the core team, and then the entire staff eventually is trained on the process and the response. And then the final thing that happens before you become an approved Heart Watch Safe school is that you conduct the drills. CHOP kind of authorizes that, yes, you thumbs up, everything looks good. You submitted the necessary paperwork, your drills defined, and then you are a Heart Safe school. So we are in the process of doing all that planning right now, and we hope to have drills started possibly by December, January. Our goal would be to have all of our schools conduct these drills, submit the necessary paperwork, and be acknowledged as Heart Safe Watch schools by the end of the year. All right?
When we saw, because I remember back in May, we talked about this. The drills are not school-wide. It's not like a fire drill. It's more
Yeah, they
specific to like the team.
Yeah, the team, and it could be all staff, and that would be after school. It's not going to involve the students. Correct.
Excellent. Well, thank you, and look forward to having all our schools be designated Heart Safe schools. It's great.
And our upcoming education committee meeting, it's a different date for us. I believe that's a Monday night, December 2nd.
Correct.
So we will have our Nights for Knowledge 3.0. We'll discuss that. And full day kindergarten update from Mrs. Crawford. And then we'll also have our much awaited EL program quality review that the Bucks County IU helped us with. Course descriptors was something that was also a major project that Tammy it's almost come to completion now, where every course has its main objective and some of the assessments involved with it, and it'll be a nice document that we hope to have electronically for the board and for the community. Of course, we'll go through any course changes and additions that we have for next year so that the board can see that. And then we talked about maybe reigniting the conversation about high school schedule in December, and then see where we want to go with that conversation. Fair enough?
Good.
All right.
Wait, questions or comments here before Mr. Hidalgo? Any other comments or questions?
No, thanks. Everybody have a great night.
All right, public comment. Anyone for public comment today, this evening? All right, great, let's adjourn. Thank you.